Before the Jedi existed, before the Sith had a name, before the Republic ever drew its first breath, something dark was already moving through the galaxy. And what we are about to walk through is the oldest chapter in the entire history of the dark side of the Force. The Force itself was always two things at once. One side was built on compassion, on selflessness, on healing and mercy. The other side fed on fear, on hatred, on aggression, and the need to control everything around it. That second side, the dark side, was tied directly to selfishness and the terror of losing what you had. And that fear opened the door to anger, and anger opened the door to suffering. The dark side was described across thousands of years of galactic history as quicker, easier, and far more tempting than the light. But it was never actually stronger. It just felt that way to the people who reached for it. And like a sickness, it could spread. One person's fear could infect a room. One planet's anger could poison a system. Left alone, the dark side grew on its own, feeding itself until there was nothing left to feed on. Now, long before anyone in the galaxy was writing anything down, beings called the Celestials were already out there shaping the stars. They were also called the Architects, and they operated on a scale that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. They built hyperspace anomalies. They moved entire species from one end of the galaxy to the other. They constructed things so enormous that civilizations thousands of years later still could not figure out how they were made. Their connection to the Force is still a mystery, but their fingerprints were on everything. While the Celestials were doing their work, another ancient species was thriving on a planet called Dathomir. The Qua were a Force-sensitive reptilian civilization, and they had technology that made them one of the most advanced groups in the galaxy. They possessed devices called Infinity Gates, which allowed them to travel instantly from one point in the galaxy to another. No hyperspace lanes, no ships crossing the stars for days. Just step through and you were on the other side of the galaxy. The Qua used this technology to explore, to teach, and to share what they knew with other species on other worlds. They were generous. They believed in balance between the light and the dark. One of the worlds the Qua visited was a planet called Lehon, hidden away in the unknown regions. And on Lehon, they found a species called the Rakata. The Qua did what they always did. They offered themselves as teachers. They shared knowledge about the Force. They helped the Rakata develop and grow. But something was very wrong with the Rakata. They were a cannibalistic species, and they had absolutely no interest in balance. They ignored every lesson the Qua tried to teach them about the light side of the Force. They drew only on the dark side. They wanted power and control, and nothing else. When the Qua realized what the Rakata truly were, they made a decision. They refused to hand over their Infinity Gate technology. And that refusal changed everything. The Rakata turned on their own teachers. A battle broke out on Lehon, and while some of the Qua fought to hold the Rakata back, others destroyed the Infinity Gate on the planet so that it could never fall into Rakatan hands. The cost was staggering. The Qua civilization never recovered. Over the generations that followed, the Qua slowly lost everything they had been and eventually devolved into simple-minded creatures called the Qui. One of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy was reduced to animals, and the Rakata did not care. They had already moved on. What the Rakata built next was the foundation of the first true dark side empire in galactic history. They developed technology that could force fear and hatred into Force-sensitive beings. They took slaves from every world they conquered, and placed those slaves into machines that converted their dark side emotions into raw energy. That energy powered Rakatan warships and Rakatan cities. Living beings turned into batteries, kept alive only because their suffering was useful. And then they built the Star Forge. The Star Forge was an enormous automated factory that floated above a star called Abo in the Lehon system. It was powered directly by the dark side of the Force, and it could produce warships and weapons on an almost limitless scale. The Star Forge was one of the most dangerous dark side creations ever assembled. And here is the part that matters. The Star Forge was not just a machine. It was partially alive. It fed on dark side energy the way a living thing feeds on food. And over time, it started feeding on its own creators. Rakatan scientists thought they could keep it under control. They were wrong. The station was actively pushing the Rakata toward worse and worse behavior, making their darkest impulses even darker, speeding up the decay of their entire civilization from the inside. By around 35,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Rakatan Infinite Empire had spread across more than 500 worlds. Their hyperdrive technology was built on the Force, which meant it could only lock onto planets with strong Force signatures. That is why so many of the most important worlds in Star Wars history, planets like Korriban, Dantooine, Dathomir, Kashyyyk, and Tatooine, all have Rakatan ruins buried beneath their surfaces. The Rakata were everywhere. They enslaved the Duros, the Kumunga, who would later become the Tusken Raiders, and the Jawas, the Selkath, the Wookiees, and humans. Their temples still stand on worlds from Honogar to Belsavis. The Rakata even reached Korriban, where a powerful Sith king named Adas had been ruling for centuries. The Rakata taught Adas how to create holocrons, dark side recording devices that could store enormous amounts of knowledge. But then they tried to take his planet from him. Adas fought them off and drove them away, but the battle cost him his life. And the knowledge they left behind on Korriban planted something deep in that world's soil, something that would grow for thousands of years. And then the Rakata themselves fell apart. A plague swept through the entire species, and it stripped them of their connection to the Force. Without that connection, every piece of technology they had ever built stopped working. Their ships went dark. Their weapons went silent. Their entire infrastructure collapsed overnight. And the slaves they had kept in chains for thousands of years rose up. Revolts broke out across the empire. Civil wars erupted among the Rakata themselves. By around 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Infinite Empire was gone. But here is what they left behind: ruins on hundreds of worlds, star maps that would lead future explorers straight to their deadliest creations, and a blueprint for exactly how to build a civilization on the dark side of the Force. Every Sith empire that came after the Rakata, from the original Sith Lords all the way to the Galactic Empire under Darth Sidious, followed the same pattern without even knowing it. Dark side power fueling technology. Conquered populations kept in line through fear, and a system that always ended up consuming the people who built it. The Rakata were the first. They were not the last. And the galaxy was about to find out just how deep the roots of the dark side actually went. The Rakata were gone. Their empire had crumbled. Their connection to the Force had been stripped away, and the galaxy was left to pick up the pieces. But the dark side did not vanish with them. It had already planted itself in too many places, on too many worlds, and inside too many minds. And the next chapter of this story begins tens of thousands of years before the Rakata even fell, on a planet most fans have never heard of. Around 36,453 years before the Battle of Yavin, 8 enormous pyramidal ships called the Thoyor traveled across the galaxy. These ships moved from world to world, collecting Force-sensitive beings from dozens of different species and civilizations. Nobody knows who built the Thoyor or who sent them, but the ships had a destination. They carried all of their passengers to a single planet in the deep core called Tython. And Tython was unlike any other world in the galaxy. This planet was so deeply connected to the Force that it physically reacted to imbalance. If the balance between light and dark tipped too far in either direction, Tython itself would lash out. Massive Force storms would erupt across the surface, tearing the landscape apart. The planet demanded equilibrium. If you lived on Tython, you respected both sides of the Force, or the ground beneath your feet would remind you why. The Force-sensitive beings who arrived on Tython founded something called the Jedi Order. And this is important because the Jedi were not the Jedi. They came before the Jedi, and they had a completely different philosophy. The Jedi believed that balance between the light and the dark was essential. They did not reject either side. They studied both. They called the light side Ashla and the dark side Bogan, names that came from Tython's 2 moons. The light moon was Ashla. The dark moon was Bogan. And if any member of the Jedi strayed too far toward one extreme, they were sent to the corresponding moon for exile and meditation until they found their center again. The entire system was built around the idea that both sides of the Force needed to exist in harmony. This arrangement held for a very long time. But then the Rakata found them. The Infinite Empire used specially trained Force-sensitive slaves called Force Hounds to sniff out worlds with powerful connections to the Force. A Force Hound named Zesh was sent by a Rakatan leader called Predor Skalnas to locate Tython. Zesh crash-landed on the planet, and his dark side presence immediately threw everything off balance. The Force storms came roaring back. The planet shook, and the Jedi had to confront something they had never truly faced before. They were exposed to the dark side as a weapon of conquest for the very first time. The Rakata did not use the dark side for meditation or understanding. They used it to dominate and enslave. That encounter with Rakatan philosophy left a mark on the Jedi. Seeds of conflict were planted that day, and they would take root over the centuries that followed. After the Infinite Empire collapsed, around 25,200 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy went through a long period of rebuilding. The species that the Rakata had enslaved for thousands of years finally had the chance to develop on their own. They adapted Rakatan hyperdrive designs and built their own versions of faster-than-light travel. Interstellar governments started forming, and around 25,053 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Galactic Republic was officially established. It was the beginning of a new era for the galaxy, and the Jedi evolved right alongside it. The Jedi Order relocated away from Tython and transformed into something new. They became the Jedi Order, and they positioned themselves as the guardians of the Republic. But with that transformation came a massive shift in philosophy. The Jedi embraced the light side of the Force and rejected the dark side completely. They developed a strict code that emphasized detachment and forbade emotional attachments. The balanced approach that the Jedi had practiced on Tython for thousands of years was abandoned. The Jedi decided that the dark side was dangerous and that the only safe path was the light. and that decision split the Order apart. Around 24,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, a Jedi named Zendor stood up and said the Order had it wrong. Zendor and his followers, a group called the Legions of Letau, believed the Jedi Code was too limiting. They argued that real power could only come from embracing passion and the full spectrum of the Force, including the dark side. Zendor was not some power-hungry villain. He genuinely believed the Jedi were weakening themselves by cutting off half of what the Force had to offer. That tension between restriction and freedom, between discipline and passion, is the same argument that would echo through the entire history of the dark side for the next 25,000 years. It never went away. It just kept showing up in different forms with different faces. Zendor and the Legions of Letau allied with a woman named Arden Lin and her group called the Followers of Palawa from the planet Bunduki. They were practitioners of a fighting style called Teras Kasi. Together they waged war against the Jedi Order in what became known as the First Great Schism. The fighting was fierce, and it ended in a confrontation between Zendor and a Jedi Master named Odrista Pina. Pina struck Zendor down, ending the rebellion's leadership. But Arden Lin fought back. She used a dark side artifact called the Kashi Mer Talisman to take Pina with her. And in the same moment, Pina used a force technique called Morichro to stop Lin's heart before falling. Arden Lin did not actually pass on from that encounter. She entered a state of suspended animation that lasted for over 25,000 years. She was not revived until the era of the Galactic Empire, long after everything we are about to discuss had already happened. The Legions of Letau were scattered. The Jedi Council declared the crisis over and moved on. But they missed the bigger picture. The philosophical divide that had sparked the First Great Schism was still there. The question of whether the dark side was inherently evil or whether it was another tool that could be used had never actually been answered. The Jedi just stopped asking it. And here is something worth knowing. The very first Dark Jedi in history was technically a man named Rajivari. He was one of the original founders of the Jedi Order on Tython, and he had grown frustrated with the direction the Order was taking. His fall proved something uncomfortable. The pull of the dark side was not something that crept into the Jedi Order from the outside. It was woven into the fabric of the Order from the very beginning. From the very first generation of Jedi, there were people who looked at the path they had chosen and decided it was not enough. For thousands of years after the First Great Schism, the galaxy settled into a stretch of relative calm. The Republic expanded. The Jedi Order grew larger and more structured. The dark side seemed to go quiet. Minor conflicts popped up here and there, but nothing came close to the scale of Zendor's rebellion. And during all those centuries of peace, the Jedi Order grew more rigid, more set in its ways, and more confident that the darkness had been dealt with. They could not see what was building at the edges. They had no idea that the longest and most devastating conflict in galactic history was right around the corner. The Second Great Schism and the 100-Year Darkness were coming. And when they arrived, they would give birth to the Sith. The philosophical cracks in the Jedi Order had been there since the very beginning. Rajivari had shown it. Zendor and the Legions of Letau had proven it. But what happened next made everything before it look like a disagreement at a dinner table. Because in 7,003 years before the Battle of Yavin, a group of Jedi stopped talking about the dark side and started doing something with it that the Order could not ignore. This was not a faction of Jedi who were meditating on darker emotions or asking uncomfortable questions about the Force. These Jedi were practicing alchemy. They were using the Force to manipulate living things, to reshape creatures at the biological level, to twist and warp life into forms that nature never intended. They were building armies out of monsters, and the Jedi Order looked at what they were doing and called it exactly what it was: an abomination. The leader of this faction was a former Jedi Master named Ajunta Pall. Pall had discovered the ability to create and alter life through what would later be known as Sith alchemy. He could take a living creature and reshape it into something else entirely, something designed for war. When the Jedi Council confronted Pall and demanded that he stop, he refused. He and his followers believed they had found a path the Jedi were too afraid to walk. And rather than submit, they broke away from the Order completely. This event became known as the Second Great Schism, and it happened in 7003 BBY. 3 years later, the situation went from bad to catastrophic. In 7000 BBY, the Dark Jedi launched a full-scale war against the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic. This conflict lasted an entire century, 100 years of fighting. It became known as the 100-Year Darkness, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had seen since the Rakata. The Dark Jedi used their alchemical knowledge to breed war beasts on a terrifying scale. They created creatures called Leviathans and other monstrous things that fought alongside them on the battlefield. These were not natural animals. They were living weapons, shaped by the Force into tools of destruction. Pall was not alone. Several other powerful Dark Jedi stood beside him during this period. Xosan was a master of dark side sorcery. Karness Moore created something called the Rakghoul Plague and an artifact known as the Moore Talisman, which had the ability to transform sentient beings into mindless creatures called Rakghouls. Remulus Draper was among the group as well. And then there was Sorzus Sin, whose personal journal would eventually become one of the most important Sith texts in galactic history. After 100 years of war, the Dark Jedi were finally defeated at the Battle of Korbos. It took a combination of Jedi counterattacks, Republic bombing campaigns, and the Dark Jedi turning on each other to bring the conflict to an end. And that last part is worth paying attention to, because internal fighting would become the defining weakness of the dark side for the rest of galactic history. The surviving Dark Jedi were rounded up by Republic forces, stripped of their weapons, and loaded onto unarmed transport ships. The Republic sent them off into the unknown regions of space with the expectation that they would drift into nothing and never be heard from again. That is not what happened. Sorzus Sin had heard rumors of a powerful species living somewhere in uncharted space. She guided the Exile fleet through the unknown regions until they reached a planet called Korriban. And what they found there changed the trajectory of the galaxy forever. Living on Korriban was an entire species called the Sith. They were a red-skinned, Force-sensitive humanoid race with bone spurs and facial tentacles, and they had a natural connection to the dark side that ran through their entire biology. The Sith species had already built a functioning civilization on Korriban. It was primitive compared to the Republic, but it was organized and deeply structured. Their society operated on a rigid caste system. Sith lords sat at the top. Below them was a priest caste, then a warrior caste called the Massassi, then an engineer caste, and at the very bottom, a slave caste. The dark side was woven into every layer of their culture. When the Dark Jedi exiles arrived on Korriban, the Sith King, Hakagram Grouch, did not know what to make of them. These were outsiders, strangers from beyond the stars. But then the exiles showed the Sith what they could do. They levitated objects, they conjured force lightning, they drew lightsabers and demonstrated weapons the Sith had never seen before. The native Sith were stunned, and behind the scenes, Grouch's own shadow hand saw an opportunity. He conspired with the newcomers and turned against his own king. Ajunta Pall struck Grouch down using the Force in front of the Sith population. And in that single act, the Dark Jedi exiles became something more than refugees. The Sith species believed they were gods. The exiles declared themselves the lords of the Sith. In the Sith language, they were called Jedi, which literally translated to Dark Jedi. Ajunta Pall took the title of the first Dark Lord of the Sith. And from that moment forward, the word Sith no longer referred only to the native red-skinned species. It became the name for an entire philosophy, an entire movement, and an entire empire built on the dark side of the Force. Over the centuries that followed, the Dark Jedi exiles and the Sith species merged. They interbred through natural means and through Sith alchemy, producing hybrid offspring that carried traits from both groups. The exiles brought their knowledge of the Force, their training, their understanding of lightsaber combat and dark side techniques. The Sith species brought their natural connection to the dark side and their existing traditions of sorcery that stretched back thousands of years. The combination of those two lineages created something far more dangerous than either one had ever been on its own. The Sith Empire spread outward from Korriban. They established their capital on an ice world called Zeost and claimed dozens of planets across the region. Their society was built around a strict hierarchy with the Dark Lord at the top, supported by a council of Sith Lords, and they developed their own dark side traditions that would endure for thousands of years. Sith alchemy allowed them to change the very nature of matter, to forge weapons infused with the dark side, and to breed creatures designed specifically for warfare. Sith sorcery gave them the power to manipulate minds, create massive illusions, and summon storms fueled by the dark side. And Sith holocrons, pyramidal recording devices, preserved the knowledge and even the personalities of every Dark Lord who came before. Each generation could learn directly from the ones who had already walked the path. One of the earliest and most powerful of these Dark Lords was Tulak Hord. Hord expanded Sith territory significantly and conquered the Dromund system, including the planet Dromund Kaas. That name might not mean much right now, but Dromund Kaas would eventually become the secret capital of a rebuilt Sith empire that operated in hiding for over 1,000 years. Hord himself was considered the greatest lightsaber duelist the Sith had ever produced during this era. And through all of this, through every generation and every new Dark Lord, one thing never faded: the hatred for the Jedi. The exiles who had been cast out of the Order passed that grudge down to their students, who passed it to theirs, who passed it to theirs. Every Sith Lord who rose to power inherited the same burning desire for revenge against the people who had thrown them into the unknown and expected them to disappear. That anger became the fuel behind everything the Sith built. But here is the part that makes this entire chapter sting. Thousands of years later, a man named Darth Revan would walk into the tomb of Ajunta Pall on Korriban and encounter the spirit of the very first Dark Lord. And Pall, the man who had started all of this, the man who had broken from the Jedi and led his followers into exile and conquered the Sith species and built the foundation for every Sith empire that would follow, expressed deep regret. He told Revan that the rebellion had not been worth it, that the Sith had always been their own worst enemy, tearing each other apart in their endless hunger for power. The man who began it all looked back across thousands of years and wished he had never started. The Sith Empire had been born in exile. A group of defeated Dark Jedi had landed on Korriban, conquered the native species, and declared themselves lords. But that was just the beginning. What came next was nearly 2,000 years of growth, and the Republic had absolutely no idea any of it was happening. The reason the Sith stayed hidden for so long was geography. Their territory sat inside a region called the Stygian Caldera, a stretch of space filled with dangerous hyperspace anomalies that made it nearly impossible for outside ships to get through. It was a natural fortress. You could not stumble into the Sith Empire by accident, and you certainly could not invade it without losing your fleet in the approach. The Sith were sealed away from the rest of the galaxy behind walls of unstable space, and they used every single year of that isolation to build. And build they did. Sith civilization during this era was far more advanced than most people would expect. They constructed massive temples across their worlds. On Zeost, towering citadels rose into the sky with enormous spires. And on Korriban, they built the Valley of the Dark Lords, a sprawling necropolis where every Dark Lord was entombed alongside their servants, their artifacts, and their dark side knowledge. Each tomb was a vault of power, sealed away and waiting for anyone bold enough to enter. The valley became the most sacred location in the entire Sith religion. To be buried there was the highest honor a Sith Lord could receive. Sith culture was built on a foundation of constant conflict. They did not see violence as something to avoid. They saw it as a basic part of being alive. Offerings were made to Sith deities. Rivals challenged each other openly and regularly. The constant fighting actually shrank the population on Korriban over time, but nobody in the Empire saw that as a problem. Conflict was the point. It was how the strong rose and the weak were removed. And the culture that grew out of this was intensely closed off from outsiders. In the Sith language, the word for stranger and the word for enemy were the same. Around 5,100 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Sith Empire reached the peak of its power under a single ruler. His name was Marka Ragnos. He was a Sith and human hybrid, a direct descendant of one of the original Dark Jedi exiles who had landed on Korriban centuries earlier. Ragnos was a formidable warrior who fought his way to the top by defeating every rival who challenged him for the title of Dark Lord. Nobody could match him. And once he held the throne, he made sure nobody ever got close enough to try again. Ragnos ruled for over 100 years. His method of maintaining control was simple and effective. He played his rivals against each other. He let ambitious Sith Lords fight among themselves while he sat above the chaos, untouchable. Any time a challenger started gaining too much influence, Ragnos crushed them before they could become a real threat. His grip on the Empire was total, and because of that grip, the Sith experienced something they had almost never known before: stability. Historians would later call this period the Golden Age of the Sith, and it existed almost entirely because one man was strong enough to hold the whole thing together by force of will alone. During this era, a young boy from a planet called Medrayas came before Ragnos seeking training. The boy was powerful in the Force, and clearly driven by ambition that went far beyond his age. Ragnos was impressed enough to name the child the ruler of Medrayas and grant him the rank of Sith Lord. He gave the boy a new name, Vitiate. At the time, this probably seemed like a minor event. One more young Sith Lord in an empire full of them. But Vitiate would eventually become the Sith Emperor, a being who ruled for over 1400 years and manipulated the course of galactic history across multiple eras. That one appointment by Marka Ragnos set something in motion that the galaxy would be dealing with for a very long time. But the stability that Ragnos had built came with a fatal flaw. Everything depended on him. The entire political structure of the Sith Empire was designed around one all-powerful ruler at the top, and Ragnos had never clearly named a successor. So when Ragnos finally fell around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the empire he had held together for over a century immediately started cracking apart. The power vacuum was instant and it was violent. Two Sith Lords stepped forward as contenders for the throne. The first was Naga Sadow. Sadow was an expansionist, a master of Sith sorcery and alchemy who operated from a secret fortress on a moon called Kar-Shian. He dreamed of pushing the empire beyond its borders and conquering new territory. The second was Ludo Kresh. Kresh was the opposite in almost every way. He was a conservative traditionalist who believed the empire should stay isolated and preserve what it already had. Sadow wanted to reach outward. Kresh wanted to hold inward, and neither one was willing to back down. The confrontation between them came during Ragnos's funeral procession in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban. In front of every assembled Sith Lord, Sadow challenged Kresh directly. The two of them drew Sith swords and fought right there among the tombs. The duel was fierce, but neither one could gain a clear advantage over the other. And then something happened that stopped both of them in their tracks. The ghost of Marka Ragnos appeared. The former Dark Lord manifested through the Force in front of the entire assembly. He spoke of the Sith Empire's great past and its uncertain future. He warned the assembled lords to choose their paths carefully, or everything they had built would be lost. He declared that only the most worthy should take his place, and then he was gone. At that exact moment, as if the Force itself had timed it perfectly, a small ship dropped out of hyperspace above Korriban. It was called the Starbreaker 12, and it was carrying two young Republic hyperspace explorers named Gav and Jory Darrigan. These two were not soldiers. They were not scouts sent by the Republic to find the Sith. They were broke. They had punched in random hyperspace coordinates while running from debts in the Koros system, and they had accidentally stumbled straight into the heart of the Sith Empire. The Darrigans were seized by Sith forces the moment they landed, and with their capture, the first contact between the Galactic Republic and the Sith Empire in nearly 2,000 years had just occurred. Nobody on either side was prepared for what that contact was about to unleash. The power struggle between Sadow and Kresh now had a new element. Two Republic citizens sitting in a Sith prison, proof that there was a galaxy full of worlds beyond the Stygian caldera. And depending on which Sith Lord decided what to do with them, the consequences were going to be enormous. The most devastating war the galaxy had ever seen was now just one decision away. Two Republic citizens were now sitting in a Sith prison on the other side of the galaxy, and the entire Sith Empire was trying to figure out what to do with them. On Zeost, the Sith Lords assembled to debate the fate of Gav and Jory Darrigan. A conclave led by Ludo Kresh declared the siblings were spies and pushed for their immediate execution. But Naga Sadow looked at these two lost explorers and saw something completely different. He saw a doorway. If the Republic existed out there, beyond the Stygian caldera, then there were entire regions of space waiting to be conquered. Sadow did not want to stay hidden anymore. He wanted to expand, and the Daragons had just handed him the excuse he needed to make that happen. Sadow put a plan together that was as clever as it was ruthless. He engineered the Daragons' escape from Sith custody using his own alchemically modified Massassi warriors, but he made it look like Republic military agents had carried out the rescue. He planted false evidence that pointed to an outside operation. The goal was fear. If the other Sith Lords believed the Republic already knew where they were and had the ability to reach them, they would panic. And panicked people are easy to lead. It worked. The fear of a Republic invasion swept through the Sith leadership, and in the chaos, Sadow positioned himself as the only leader bold enough to strike first. The assembled lords named him the new Dark Lord of the Sith and authorized a preemptive attack against the Republic. With the title secured, Sadow moved the Daragon siblings to his personal fortress on the moon Kar Shian. He separated them. He kept Jory locked away while he trained Gav in Sith sorcery, pulling the young man deeper into the dark side. When Ludo Kresh launched an attack on what he believed was Sadow's base on the moon Kar Delba, he hit a decoy. The real fortress was elsewhere, and Sadow had been ready for the move the entire time. While Kresh was occupied with the decoy, Sadow convinced Jory to flee back to Republic space aboard the Starbreaker 12. What Jory did not know was that her ship was carrying the hyperspace route from the Sith Empire directly to the Republic. Sadow had given her the map on purpose. She was not escaping. She was delivering the path his invasion fleet would follow. Before any of that, Sadow had already planted Massassi agents aboard the ships of two of Kresh's key allies, Sith Lords named Horak Mul and Dor Gal Ram. Those agents struck down both lords and turned their own ship cannons against Kresh's fleet. Kresh was forced to retreat with what little he had left. And with his rivals seemingly out of the picture, Sadow assembled a massive invasion fleet and prepared to do something no Sith Lord had done in nearly 2,000 years: attack the Republic. Sadow's entire strategy depended on one thing: deception. He commanded the invasion from a personal Sith meditation sphere, a vessel that allowed him to project his dark side energy across the battlefield. From inside that sphere, Sadow used Sith sorcery to create enormous illusions that made his forces look far larger and far more powerful than they actually were. He wore bejeweled Sith amulets on both hands to focus the dark side energy needed to maintain those projections. The war he was about to launch was built on a lie. His forces were real, but they were not nearly as strong as the Republic was about to believe. The Sith invasion hit the Republic on multiple fronts at the same time. Sith forces struck Coruscant itself, the Koros worlds controlled by Empress Teta, and several other Republic strongholds. The Republic had no warning and no preparation. Nobody in the Republic had ever encountered Sith war beasts or Massassi warriors. Nobody had ever faced Sith sorcery on a battlefield. The chaos was total. Entire defense lines collapsed in the opening hours. And the worst part was that someone had tried to warn them. Empress Teta and her Jedi advisors, including a young Jedi scholar named Oden Ur, had received a Force vision of an incoming attack. They brought that warning to the Republic Senate. The Senate dismissed it completely. When the Sith arrived, the Republic was caught in the worst possible position. But the dark side has a weakness that has never changed across the entire history of the galaxy: betrayal. And it came from the last person Sadow expected. Gav Daragon, the young Republic explorer Sadow had been training in Sith sorcery, watched the invasion unfold and was horrified. The destruction Sadow had unleashed was far beyond anything Gav had been prepared for. The guilt of knowing he had helped make this possible tore him apart. he turned on Sadow. During a critical moment in the fighting, Gav disrupted Sadow's concentration, breaking the Dark Lord's battle meditation, and the second that connection was severed, the illusions collapsed. The Sith forces that had looked overwhelming minutes before were suddenly revealed to be a fraction of what they had appeared. Republic commanders saw the truth, regrouped fast, and started pushing back. Sadow realized the war was lost, and instead of going down with his fleet, he ran. But before he left, he used a Sith superweapon mounted aboard his flagship, the Corsair, to trigger the Star Primus Golud to explode into a supernova. The blast destroyed everything in the system. Gav Daragon was caught in it. But before the end, Gav had transmitted the hyperspace coordinates of the Sith Empire to Empress Teta. His final act made sure the Republic would be able to find the Sith homeworlds. Sadow fled back to the Sith Empire, expecting to regroup. Instead, he found Ludo Kresh waiting for him. Kresh had faked his own destruction during their earlier confrontation. He had been sitting in the shadows with his remaining forces, waiting for exactly this moment. Civil war erupted between the two rivals. Sadow sacrificed several of his own ships to wipe out Kresh's fleet, and this time Kresh fell for good. But the victory meant nothing. The Sith Empire was shattered. Sadow's forces were gutted, and the Republic was coming. Armed with the coordinates Gav Daragon had sent before the supernova, Republic and Jedi forces pursued the Sith all the way back to Korriban. The Supreme Chancellor gave the order to make sure the Sith could never threaten the Republic again. What followed was a systematic campaign that drove the Sith species to the edge of extinction. Sith worlds were torn apart. The empire that had taken nearly 2,000 years to build was dismantled in months. Sith historians in later eras would describe the Republic's campaign as nothing short of the near-total destruction of their entire civilization. Naga Sadow escaped the fall. He took a small group of Massassi warriors and fled to a remote jungle moon called Yavin 4, where he placed himself into suspended animation inside one of the temples his followers built for him. Those temples would stand for thousands of years, and one of them would eventually become the base of operations for the Rebel Alliance during the events of A New Hope. Other survivors scattered across the galaxy. Some ended up on worlds like Ambria, Viyun, and Tund. On a planet called Kesh, a crashed Sith ship called the Omen stranded its crew. Those stranded Sith formed what would later be known as the Lost Tribe of Sith, cut off from the rest of the galaxy for thousands of years. The sorcerers of Tund faded into irrelevance and eventually became little more than con artists. But the most important survivor was the one nobody was watching, Vitiate, the boy that Marka Ragnos had elevated to Sith Lord years earlier. Vitiate gathered the remaining Sith and led them into the unknown regions, to the planet Dromund Kaas. There, hidden from the Republic and the Jedi, the Sith began rebuilding in total secrecy. And Vitiate did something that secured his place as one of the most terrifying beings in galactic history. He performed a ritual on his homeworld of Nathema that consumed every living thing on the planet. Every creature, every plant, every trace of life was drained to fuel a single act of dark side power. Vitiate used that energy to grant himself immortality. He declared himself the Sith Emperor, and he would rule from the shadows for over 1,400 years. Meanwhile, the Jedi were rewarded for their role in defending the Republic. They were given the sacred mountain on Coruscant, and on that mountain they built the Jedi Temple. That building would serve as the headquarters of the Jedi Order for the next 5,000 years. The Great Hyperspace War was over. The Sith Empire was gone. But the way the Republic had handled its victory left a scar that would never heal. The survivors remembered everything, and the hatred they carried would fuel every Sith war that came after. For nearly 1,000 years after the Great Hyperspace War, the galaxy believed the Sith were finished. The Republic had chased them to the edges of known space. Their homeworlds had been torn apart. Their species had been pushed to the brink of extinction. And for a very long time, it seemed like the dark side had finally been put to rest. But the dark side was never gone. It had just moved somewhere the Jedi could not see it. It lived inside holocrons sealed in forgotten tombs. It clung to artifacts scattered across the galaxy. And most dangerously, it survived in the spirits of Sith lords who refused to let go. Beings who had become so saturated with the dark side that even passing on could not stop them from reaching out and pulling new victims in. Around 4,400 years before the Battle of Yavin, a young Jedi prodigy named Freedon Nadd was training on the Jedi stronghold world of Ossus. Nadd was talented, but he was restless. He felt held back by the Order. The teachings were not enough for him. The structure was suffocating. And at some point, Nadd made the decision to leave. He struck down his own Jedi Master and fled Ossus, heading straight for Yavin 4. The jungle moon where Naga Sadow had placed himself in suspended animation over 1,000 years earlier. Nadd found Sadow still clinging to existence inside his temple. The former Dark Lord's body was failing, but his spirit still held power. Sadow taught Nadd the ways of the Sith, passing along everything he knew about dark side sorcery and alchemy. And when Nadd had learned enough, he turned on his teacher. He ended Sadow, absorbed the Dark Lord's remaining power, and claimed the title for himself. The student had consumed the master. It was a pattern that the Sith would repeat over and over again for thousands of years. Nadd left Yavin 4 and traveled to a planet called Onderon. Using his Sith abilities, he conquered the population and established himself as the planet's king. He built a dynasty of dark side practitioners and constructed the great walled city of Iziz. His rule was harsh and absolute, and the people who rejected his authority were cast outside the walls of Iziz into the dangerous wilderness beyond. Those exiles learned to survive by taming the massive beasts that roamed Onderon's wilds. They became known as the Beast Riders, and for generations they waged war against the dark side rulers inside the city walls. When Nadd's physical body eventually gave out, his story did not end. His spirit refused to pass into the Force. Instead, Nadd's ghost continued to influence Onderon's rulers from beyond the grave, whispering to them, guiding them, keeping the dark side embedded in the planet's leadership for centuries after his body was gone. The Jedi eventually caught on. A Jedi Master named Arkajeth led a mission to Onderon to break Nadd's hold on the planet. During what became known as the Freedon Nadd Uprising, the Jedi managed to drive Nadd's spirit out, or so they thought. Nadd was wounded but far from finished. Around 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Nadd's spirit reached out across the galaxy and found two new vessels. The first were a pair of aristocratic cousins from the Empress Teta system named Satal and Alima Keto. The Keto cousins had traveled to Onderon and stolen Sith artifacts from the remains of Nadd's influence there. With those artifacts and Nadd's guidance from beyond, the cousins founded a dark side cult called the Krath. They used the Krath to stage a violent takeover of the Empress Teta system, overthrowing the ruling class and installing themselves as military leaders. In a matter of months, two young nobles with no Sith training had seized an entire star system using stolen dark side power and the whispered instructions of a ghost. But Nadd's spirit had a second target, one that was far more dangerous than two ambitious aristocrats. His name was Exile Kun. Kun was a Jedi student training under the Krevaki Jedi Master Vodosyosk Bas on Dantooine. He was gifted, he was arrogant, and he was completely convinced that he was destined for something greater than what the Jedi Order could offer. Against his master's warnings, Kun began searching for forbidden Sith knowledge. He wanted to understand the dark side on his own terms, and Nadd's spirit was more than happy to show him the way. Guided by Nadd, Kun traveled to Korriban. He walked into the Valley of the Dark Lords and entered the ancient tombs where Sith spirits tested him and tormented him. Then he went to Yavin 4, the same moon where Nadd had found Sadow. Inside one of Sadow's temples, a massive stone structure collapsed on top of Kun. His bones were crushed in over 100 places. He was pinned beneath the rubble, broken and fading. And that is when Nadd's spirit appeared and offered him a deal. Salvation, healing, power. But only if Kun surrendered completely to the dark side. Kun accepted. Dark side energy poured through his shattered body. The bones mended. The pain receded. And in that moment, Exar Kun stopped being a Jedi. But Kun was nobody's servant. The second he had the power to stand on his own, he turned on Nadd. Using his new Sith abilities and a Sith amulet he had found in the temples, Kun destroyed Freedon Nadd's spirit permanently. The ghost that had manipulated Onderon for centuries, that had created the Krath, that had lured Kun to this exact moment, was gone. Kun had used Nadd to get what he wanted and then erased him. With Nadd out of the picture, Kun took control of Yavin 4. The Massassi natives still living on the moon, descendants of the warriors Naga Sadow had brought with him over 1,000 years earlier, became Kun's slaves. He used Sith alchemy to mutate them into monstrous servants, twisting their bodies into something barely recognizable. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Krath were causing serious problems. They launched military campaigns against the Republic from the Empress Teta system. During the Battle of Denabah, Jedi Master Arca Jeth, the same Jedi who had tried to break Nadd's hold on Onderon, was lost. His student, a Jedi Knight named Ulic Qel-Droma, was devastated. The grief hit him so hard that he proposed a plan most of the Jedi Order thought was insane. He would infiltrate the Krath from the inside and destroy them. The Jedi reluctantly agreed. It was a disaster. Once inside the Krath, Ulic was injected with a dark side poison by Satal Keto. The poison flooded his mind with rage and accelerated his fall to the dark side at a pace nobody anticipated. Ulic struck down Satal, took Alima Keto as a partner, and assumed leadership of the Krath entirely. When the Jedi sent a team to pull him out, Ulic lashed out at his own people. He turned on his friends, on his brother Kay, and on the woman he loved, a Jedi named Nomi Sunrider. The man who had gone in to save the galaxy from the Krath had become the Krath's new leader. And then things got worse. Exar Kun, sitting on Yavin 4 with his Massassi army, sensed the Krath and saw them as potential rivals. He traveled to the Empress Teta system to confront Ulic Qel-Droma directly. The two of them drew lightsabers and fought. Both men were wearing Sith amulets, and as the duel intensified, those amulets activated on their own, triggering something neither of them expected. The spirit of Marka Ragnos appeared, the ancient Dark Lord, the same ruler whose passing had sparked the power vacuum that led to the Great Hyperspace War, manifested in front of both men. He stopped the fight. He declared that both of them were worthy of the Sith legacy. Ragnos named Exar Kun the new Dark Lord of the Sith. He named Ulic Qel-Droma as Kun's apprentice. And with a touch of his spectral hand, Ragnos burned a Sith mark into Ulic's forehead. Two of the most powerful fallen Jedi in the galaxy were now united under one banner. They had an army of Krath soldiers, an army of mutated Massassi, and the combined dark side knowledge of every Sith Lord who had come before them. The galaxy had not seen a threat like this since the Great Hyperspace War, and what came next would be even worse. Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma now had the blessing of Marka Ragnos, the backing of the Krath military, and the full weight of the dark side behind them. But they were not done building. Before they launched their war, they assembled a coalition that should have been impossible. Ulic challenged the leader of the Mandalorian warrior clans, Mandalore the Indomitable, to single combat. The Mandalorians followed strength above all else. If you could beat their leader one-on-one, you earned the loyalty of every warrior under his command. Ulic won that fight. And just like that, the most feared fighting force in the galaxy was now working for the Sith. Kun took a different approach. He traveled to Jedi enclaves across the galaxy, carrying Sith holocrons with him. He opened those holocrons in front of young Jedi students, exposing them to the seductive pull of the dark side. One by one, he corrupted them. He turned them against their own order. He built a secret network of Sith converts hidden within the Jedi itself. Kun called this group the Brotherhood of the Sith. These were not outsiders. These were Jedi who had been turned, and nobody in the Order knew they had fallen. In 3,996 years before the Battle of Yavin, the coalition was ready. Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma launched the Great Sith War. Ulic proved to be a brilliant military commander. He gathered the Mandalorian forces and led a raid on the Republic shipyards at Fuerost. Ulic proved to be a brilliant military commander. He gathered the Mandalorian forces and led a raid on the Republic shipyards at Fuerost, where he seized 300 newly completed warships in a single operation. With those stolen ships, he launched an audacious assault directly on Coruscant. The attack did not succeed in taking the planet, but the fact that the Sith had the nerve to strike the capital of the Republic sent shockwaves across the galaxy. During the fighting on Coruscant, Ulic was captured by Republic forces and brought before the Galactic Senate to stand trial for his crimes. What happened next is one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Legends timeline. Exar Kun was not going to let his apprentice rot in a Republic prison. He stormed the Senate Hall alongside Mandalore the Indomitable and a force of Massassi warriors. And then Kun did something that demonstrated just how far beyond the Jedi he had gone. He used Sith sorcery to mentally freeze the entire Galactic Senate Assembly. Hundreds of senators sat paralyzed in their seats, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except watch. Only the Jedi present and the Supreme Chancellor were left unaffected by the spell. Kun freed Ulic from custody right there in the chamber. And then he struck down Supreme Chancellor Sidrona in front of the entire helpless Senate. As Kun turned to leave, one person stepped forward to stop him. His former master, the Kreva'aki Jedi Master Vodosiosque Bas, the same teacher who had trained Kun on Dantooine and warned him about the dangers of the dark side, stood in his path. Bas challenged Kun with his legendary Force-imbued staff. The two of them fought in the Senate chamber. At first, the duel was even. Bas was old, but his connection to the Force was deep and his skill was real. Then Kun revealed something the galaxy had never seen before. A double-bladed lightsaber an ancient Sith weapon design that Kun had reconstructed from forbidden knowledge. The second blade overwhelmed Boss. The old master sensed what was coming. In his final moments, he told Kun that they would meet again and that he would defeat Kun when they did. Kun struck his former teacher down anyway, dismissing the prophecy even as Boss became one with the Force. At the same time Kun was tearing through the Senate, he activated the network of Sith converts he had planted inside the Jedi Order. Across the galaxy, in Jedi temples and enclaves on dozens of worlds, young Jedi who had secretly fallen to the dark side turned on their own masters in a coordinated wave. The Jedi Order lost a significant portion of its senior leadership in a single synchronized strike. It was devastating. The Order had been hit from the inside by people they trusted, and the damage crippled their ability to respond to the larger war. The conflict escalated. Alima Cato, now commanding Naga Sadow's ancient flagship the Corsair, used the ship's dark side superweapon to trigger the Kron supernova. She detonated the stars of the Kron cluster. Entire star systems were wiped from existence in the blast, and the shock wave from the supernova reached the nearby Jedi library world of Ossus, a planet that had served as one of the great centers of Jedi knowledge for thousands of years. The surface of Ossus was incinerated. Jedi scrambled to evacuate the most precious texts and artifacts from the Great Library before the devastation reached them. But there was not enough time. Centuries of accumulated knowledge were lost forever. While the Jedi were frantically trying to save what they could on Ossus, the Sith launched an assault on the planet to steal whatever the Jedi left behind. And it was during this battle that Ulic Qel-Droma's fall reached its lowest point. In the chaos of the fighting, Ulic came face to face with his own brother, Kay Qel-Droma. Kay begged Ulic to come back. He pleaded with him to let go of the dark side and return to who he had been. And in a fit of rage, Ulic struck his brother down. The moment it happened, something inside Ulic broke. The reality of what he had just done hit him all at once. Nomi Sunrider, the woman who had once loved Ulic, witnessed the whole thing. And in her grief and fury, she did something that had never been done before in recorded history. She used the Force to sever Ulic's connection to the Force entirely. She cut him off from everything. The power, the darkness, the light, all of it gone. Ulic was left standing on the battlefield as an ordinary man, stripped of everything the Force had given him. He was broken, and he surrendered. Ulic agreed to lead Republic and Jedi forces to Yavin 4. A massive combined fleet descended on the Jungle Moon to end Exar Kun once and for all. But Kun saw them coming. He knew the war was lost. And rather than face his enemies, he performed one final act of dark side power that cemented his place as one of the most dangerous Sith Lords who ever lived. He drained the life force of the entire Massassi race on Yavin 4. Thousands of living beings, consumed in a single dark side ritual, their energy used to bind Kun's own spirit to the temple stones. His physical body was destroyed in the process, but his consciousness survived. Exar Kun's spirit was locked inside the temples of Yavin 4, and it would stay there for over 4,000 years. The Great Sith War was over. The damage it left behind was staggering. The Kron supernova had destroyed entire star systems. Ossus was a ruin. The Jedi Order was gutted. Civilians across the galaxy had been caught in the crossfire. The Mandalorians were scattered after their defeat, and Mandalore the Indomitable was lost fleeing to the jungle moon of Duxin, claimed by the creatures that lived in its wilderness. Ulic Qel-Droma spent his remaining years as a broken, Force-blind exile. But when he eventually passed, his body dissolved into the Force, the same way Jedi Masters did. After everything, he had found some small piece of redemption. The Great Sith War had gutted the Jedi Order, scorched entire star systems, and left the Republic scrambling to rebuild. And before that recovery was anywhere close to finished, a new enemy showed up at the front door. Around 3,964 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, united under a warlord called Mandalore the Ultimate, launched a massive invasion of Republic space. The Mandalorians tore through the Outer Rim, conquering world after world, leaving devastation on a scale the galaxy had not seen since the Sith invasion 1,000 years earlier. The Jedi Order watched it happen and did nothing. They were still carrying the scars of the Great Sith War. They had lost senior leaders. They had watched their own members fall to the dark side. And the Jedi High Council was terrified that jumping into another war would create the conditions for another fall. So they held back. They told the younger Jedi to be patient. They said they needed to study the threat more carefully before committing to action. Meanwhile, Republic worlds were being overrun, and the people living on those worlds were paying the price for the Council's caution. 2 young Jedi Knights were not willing to wait. The first was Revan. The second was his closest friend, a man named Malak, who had been born under the name Alec. These two defied the Council's orders. They rallied a large faction of younger Jedi who felt the same frustration they did, gathered Republic soldiers who were desperate for leadership, and went to war. Revan took command, and he turned out to be one of the most gifted military minds the Republic had ever seen. Under his direction, the Republic started winning. System by system, the Mandalorians were pushed back. Battles that had seemed unwinnable started turning. But the war was doing something to Revan. The longer he fought, the more ruthless his decisions became. He started sacrificing soldiers in ways that made the people around him uncomfortable. He employed tactics that crossed lines the Jedi were never supposed to cross. He prioritized victory above everything else. And the moral cost of that approach was adding up. The Jedi Council had warned that this exact thing would happen. War had a way of pulling people toward the dark side, and Revan was walking that edge closer and closer with every campaign. The war ended at the Battle of Malachor V in 3,960 years before the Battle of Yavin. Revan boarded the Mandalorian flagship and defeated Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. And in his final moments, Mandalore revealed something that changed the entire meaning of the war. The Mandalorian invasion had not been a purely Mandalorian idea. It had been influenced from the shadows by a Sith faction operating out of the unknown regions. The Sith Emperor, Vitiate, the same child that Marka Ragnos had elevated to Sith Lord thousands of years earlier, had manipulated the Mandalorians into attacking the Republic as the opening move of his own long-term plan. The entire war had been a setup. During the battle, Revan authorized the activation of a superweapon called the Mass Shadow Generator. It had been designed by an engineer named Bao Dur and was deployed by one of Revan's generals, a Jedi named Mitra Surik, who would later be known as the Jedi Exile. The weapon used artificial gravity to crush the Mandalorian fleet. But the destruction was not limited to the enemy. Malachor V itself was ripped apart. Thousands on both sides were lost, and the dark side energy released by that level of destruction was so intense that it scarred the planet permanently, creating what the Jedi would later describe as a wound in the Force. Mandalore's confession sent Revan and Malak chasing answers. They followed the trail into the unknown regions and found exactly what Mandalore had described. On Dromund Kaas, they discovered Vitiate's reconstituted Sith Empire, the one that had been rebuilding in secret for over 1,000 years since the fall of the original Sith homeworlds. But the Sith Emperor was ready for them. Vitiate dominated their minds. He completed their fall to the dark side and sent them back into Republic space as his advance agents. Their mission was to locate the Rakatan Star Forge and prepare the Republic for Sith conquest. Revan and Malak found the Star Forge, but they did not deliver it to Vitiate. Somewhere along the way, they broke free of the Emperor's control. Instead of reporting back, they claimed the Star Forge for themselves and built their own Sith empire on top of it. The Star Forge's limitless production capacity let them churn out warships at a pace the Republic could not match. They recruited former Republic soldiers and fallen Jedi to their cause. Darth Revan and Darth Malak launched what became known as the Jedi Civil War in 3,959 years before the Battle of Yavin. Revan fought this war differently than anyone expected. He was strategic and precise. He targeted Republic military infrastructure but left civilian populations alone. His goal was not to burn the Republic down. He wanted to take it over. He intended to rule it, reshape it, and use it as a weapon against the true Sith Empire hiding in the unknown regions. Malak did not share that vision. Malak was aggressive, impatient, and increasingly resentful of playing second to his former friend. The tension between them was building towards something ugly. The breaking point came when a Jedi strike team led by a young Jedi named Bastila Shan boarded Revan's flagship. Bastila possessed a rare Force ability called Battle Meditation, which could turn the tide of entire engagements. The Jedi had sent her to capture Revan and end the war. Malak saw an opportunity he could not resist. While the strike team was aboard, Malak ordered his own ships to open fire on Revan's vessel. He was willing to destroy his master, the Jedi strike team, and his own allies in a single move if it meant he could take the throne for himself. Bastila survived the attack. So did Revan. Barely. She pulled his broken body from the wreckage and brought him before the Jedi Council. And the Council made a decision that would define the rest of this chapter. They wiped Revan's memories. Every experience, every decision, every piece of his identity as a Sith Lord was erased. They gave him a new identity as a common Republic soldier and sent him back into the galaxy with no knowledge of who he had been. Through a Force bond with Bastila, Revan was drawn back along the same path he had traveled as a Sith Lord. He found himself searching for star maps, ancient Rakatan artifacts on Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Manaan, Korriban, and Dantooine. Each map brought him closer to the Star Forge. The truth came out aboard a Sith warship called the Leviathan. Malak captured Revan and Bastila, and he revealed everything. He told Revan who he really was. Every memory the Jedi Council had erased came crashing back. Revan stood at the crossroads of his entire existence. He could embrace the dark side again, reclaim the empire he had built, and pick up where Darth Revan had left off. Or he could reject it. He chose the light. Revan fought his way to the Star Forge for the final confrontation. But there was one more obstacle before he reached Malak. Bastila had been captured during the fighting, and Malak had turned her to the dark side. She stood between Revan and his former friend, fully committed to the darkness. Revan did not fight her with aggression. He reached her through the bond they shared, through the connection between them, through the care they had built across their journey together. He pulled her back. Bastila returned to the light. Then Revan faced Malak. The two former friends fought aboard the Star Forge in a lightsaber duel that carried the weight of everything they had been through together. Every mission, every betrayal, every decision that had led them to this moment. Malak fell. The Star Forge was destroyed, and Revan walked out the other side as something the galaxy had not seen in a very long time. A redeemed Sith Lord. The Republic honored him as the Prodigal Knight, a hero who had found his way back from the darkest place a Jedi could go. But the cost of the Jedi Civil War was enormous. Hundreds of Jedi had been lost or had fallen to the dark side. The Republic was shattered economically and militarily. The Star Forge was gone, but the remnants of the Sith Empire that Revan and Malak had built were still scattered across the galaxy, and lurking behind all of it, hidden in the unknown regions on Dromund Kaas, the Sith Emperor Vitiate was still very much alive. Still waiting, still planning. The threat that Revan had originally gone searching for had not gone anywhere. Revan had been redeemed. The Star Forge was destroyed. The Jedi Civil War was over, and for a brief window of time, it looked like the galaxy might actually get a chance to heal. Revan married Bastila Shan, and the two of them stepped away from the spotlight. But the peace did not last inside Revan's own mind. The memories that the Jedi Council had wiped were coming back. Fragments of his time in the unknown regions, fragments of what he had seen on Dromund Kaas, fragments of the Sith Emperor. Vitiate was still out there, and Revan could not let that go. Eventually, Revan made a decision that cost him everything he had just fought to reclaim. He left Bastila, he left their unborn child, and he departed known space alone, heading back into the unknown regions to confront the Sith Emperor by himself. It was a mission he would not return from. Vitiate captured Revan and locked him in stasis. For 300 years, Revan remained a prisoner of the Sith Emperor. But even trapped in that state, Revan found a way to fight. He used the Force to reach into Vitiate's mind, subtly influencing the Emperor's thoughts, delaying the planned Sith invasion of the Republic by centuries. He could not stop it forever, but he bought the galaxy time it desperately needed. Back in Republic space, the power vacuum left by Malak's fall tore what remained of Revan's Sith Empire into pieces. Warlords and pretenders fought over the scraps, and from the wreckage, 3 Sith Lords rose who came closer to wiping out the Jedi Order than anyone before them. The first was Darth Traya, the Lord of Betrayal. Her real name was Krayt, and she had been a Jedi Master. She had been one of Revan's own teachers when he was still a Padawan. After Revan fell to the dark side, the Jedi Council pointed the finger at Krayt. They blamed her for failing to stop his fall. They cast her out of the Order. It was not a gentle separation. They stripped her of her standing and sent her away. Embittered and questioning every belief she had ever held, Krayt wandered the galaxy searching for answers. She ended up on Malachor V. The planet was still saturated with dark side energy from the mass shadow generator. That energy swallowed her. She fell, and she fell hard. On Malachor V, she discovered the Trayus Academy, a Sith training facility hidden deep beneath the planet's surface. She claimed it for herself and began training new apprentices. She took the name Darth Traya. The second was something the galaxy had never encountered before: Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. Nihilus had been present on Malachor V when the mass shadow generator fired during the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars. The trauma of that event, the sheer scale of the destruction echoing through the Force, turned him into something that was barely a person anymore. Nihilus became a wound in the Force. He fed on the Force itself. He needed to consume Force energy to survive, and his hunger never stopped. It could never be satisfied. He could drain entire planets of every living thing in a single act. He proved it on the Miraluka colony world of Qatar. He consumed every being on the surface, every person, every creature, every trace of life. All of it gone. Only one Miraluka survived, a woman named Visas Mar. Nihilus kept her alive and took her as his apprentice. By the time Nihilus reached the height of his power, there was almost nothing left of his physical body. He existed as a presence inside a mask and robes, less a living being and more of a dark side event. A sentient void that consumed everything it touched. The third was Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain. Sion was a warrior whose body had been shattered and broken so many times that it should have stopped functioning long ago. His flesh was cracked and decaying. His bones were fractured in dozens of places, and every single wound, every piece of rotting tissue, every broken fragment of his body was held together by one thing: hatred. The dark side flowed through Sion's rage and kept him standing when biology said he should have collapsed. He was effectively immortal in combat. You could strike him down and he would get back up. You could hit him with everything you had and his fury would drag him to his feet again. The only way to truly end Darth Sion was to convince him to let go of his own hatred, and nobody had ever managed to do that. Traya trained both of them at the Trayus Academy, but the dark side's oldest habit repeated itself. Nihilus and Sion turned on their master. They betrayed the Lord of Betrayal, stripped Kreia of her connection to the Force, and cast her out of the academy she had built. Then the two of them launched the first Jedi Purge. Their campaign was systematic and terrifyingly effective. Sion led squads of Sith assassins trained to mask their presence in the Force completely. These assassins hunted Jedi in small groups, ambushing them in ones and twos, picking them off across the galaxy. Nihilus took a different approach. Wherever Jedi gathered in significant numbers, the concentration of Force-sensitive beings acted like a signal fire to his hunger. He would consume the entire world. The Jedi had nowhere to hide. If they scattered, Sion's assassins found them. If they gathered, Nihilus devoured them. The Jedi Order was reduced to a handful of survivors hiding in the farthest corners of the galaxy. The Jedi Council went into exile. The Order effectively ceased to exist. The last real hope the galaxy had was a woman named Mitra Surik. She spent the next decade wandering the galaxy as an ordinary person, carrying the memory of what she had done at Malachor V with no Force to help her carry it. When Surik returned to known space, she was pulled into the conflict with the Triumvirate, and the person who found her first was Kreia. Darth Traya, cast out by her own apprentices, had attached herself to Surik as a mentor, hiding her true identity and her true intentions. With Kreia guiding her, Surik slowly rebuilt her connection to the Force. She gathered allies along the way. Visas Mar, who had turned against Nihilus. A Mandalorian warrior named Canderous Ordo, now going by Mandalore the Preserver. An Echani warrior named Brianna. A Miraluka Jedi named Mikal, and others who joined her cause as she moved from world to world. Surik confronted Nihilus at the Battle of Telos IV. She boarded his flagship, the Ravager, and faced the Lord of Hunger directly. When she defeated him, his body dissolved into nothing. The mask clattered to the floor. It was the only physical proof that Darth Nihilus had ever existed. On Malachor V, Surik faced Darth Sion. She fought him, and every time she struck him down, his hatred pulled him back to his feet. She could not beat him with strength, so she changed her approach. She spoke to him. She used compassion. She convinced Sion that his existence was nothing but suffering, that holding on to his rage was only prolonging an agony that would never end. and for the first time in his existence, Sion listened. He let go. His hatred released its grip, and his body crumbled apart as the dark side finally stopped holding him together. In the deepest level of the Trayus Academy, Surik faced Darth Traya at last. Kreia finally revealed her true philosophy, and it was unlike anything any Jedi or Sith had ever proposed. She did not serve the dark side. She did not serve the light. She hated the Force itself. All of it. She believed the Force was not a gift. She believed it was a leash, that it controlled and manipulated every living thing in the galaxy like a puppet master pulling strings. Kreia wanted to use the wound that had been created at Malachor V to unravel the Force entirely, to destroy it across the galaxy and free every living being from its influence forever. Surik defeated her, and in her final moments, Kreia delivered prophecies about what was coming. She spoke of the Mandalorians. She spoke of Revan. She spoke of the galaxy's future. After the triumvirate was finished, Surik followed Revan's path into the unknown regions. She found him, and with the help of a Sith Lord named Scourge, the two of them launched an attempt to take down the Sith Emperor Vitiate once and for all. But Scourge received a Force vision at the worst possible moment. He saw that this was not the right time, that the Emperor's fall would come later, through different hands. Scourge betrayed them. He struck Surik down and allowed Revan to be captured again. Revan was locked back in stasis for another 300 years. The Sith Emperor remained untouched, and the galaxy's best chance at ending the threat in the unknown regions was gone. The Sith Triumvirate was gone. The Jedi Order slowly rebuilt itself from the handful of survivors who had made it through the first Jedi Purge. And for a while, the Republic regained its footing. But the Sith were not finished. They were never finished. What came next was not a single war or a single villain. It was 1,000 years of continuous conflict that nearly dragged the entire galaxy into permanent darkness. After the Triumvirate fell, the remaining Sith splintered into competing factions, cults, and splinter groups spread across the galaxy. There was no single Dark Lord holding things together. There was no unified empire. There were just dozens of Sith warlords, each one carving out their own territory, each one fighting the Republic, and just as often fighting each other. This era became known as the New Sith Wars, and it stretched from roughly 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin all the way to 1,000 years before it. A full millennium of war. During this period, the galaxy went through what historians later called the Dark Age of the Republic. Central authority collapsed. The Republic government could not hold its own systems together. Entire sectors fell under Sith control. Communication between Republic worlds broke down. Regions that had been connected for thousands of years were suddenly cut off from each other. Civilization did not just stall, it retreated. And the Jedi, who had always been peacekeepers, were forced into a role they were never designed for. They became the galaxy's last line of defense. Jedi Lords rose up as warrior leaders who governed entire sectors, commanding armies and holding territory like kings. The Order was stretched so thin that it was barely holding together. During this era, the Fourth Great Schism erupted within the Jedi Order. A group of dark Jedi attempted to activate an ancient celestial superweapon called the Cosmic Turbine in the Vultar system. They lost control of the device, and it destroyed the entire system. The Vultar Cataclysm wiped out everything in the area and produced yet another wave of fallen Jedi who joined the Sith cause. The dark side just kept finding new recruits. Sith warlords fought over fiefdoms, the same way rival gangs fight over territory. At various points during the new Sith Wars, the Sith controlled enough space to function as a genuine rival government to the Republic. The Republic military could not keep up. The Jedi were exhausted, and the war just kept going, decade after decade, century after century, with no end in sight. Then, around 1,010 years before the Battle of Yavin, a Sith Lord named Skir Kon tried something new. Kon had originally been a Jedi Master before falling to the dark side, which meant he understood both sides of the conflict better than most. He looked at the state of the Sith and saw the same problem that had been destroying them since the very beginning: infighting. Every time the Sith gained ground, they turned on each other. Ambition and power struggles tore apart whatever progress they made. Kon believed he had the solution. He founded a group called the Brotherhood of Darkness, an organization designed to unite every Sith faction under a single banner. Kon's idea was radical. He abolished the title of Darth entirely. He considered it too tied to individual ambition, too much of a magnet for the kind of ego-driven power grabs that had always ripped the Sith apart. Instead, he declared equality among all Sith Lords within the Brotherhood. No single Dark Lord would sit above the rest. Everyone would share the power. It was supposed to eliminate the infighting for good. It did not work. In practice, the Brotherhood's model of shared leadership diluted the dark side's power across too many people. Instead of one focused stream of dark side energy flowing through one or two powerful individuals, it was spread thin across an entire organization. And the political compromises required to keep everyone happy replaced the ruthless meritocracy that had always driven the Sith to be stronger with each generation. The Brotherhood had numbers, but it lacked the concentrated power that the greatest Sith Lords of history had wielded. Still, the Brotherhood fielded enormous armies and won significant victories against the Republic's Army of Light, led by a Jedi Lord named Hoth. The war reached its peak on a planet called Ruusan, a world with a strong connection to the Force. 7 separate battles were fought on Ruusan's surface. The fighting devastated the landscape and drove the planet's native Force-sensitive species, called the Bouncers, into madness. And it was during this war, on the outskirts of the Brotherhood's ranks, that the most important Sith Lord in 1,000 years was quietly being forged. His name was Desel. He was born on a miserable mining world called Apatros. His father was an abusive miner who drank heavily and made his son's life a daily punishment. The man called the boy Bane, as in the bane of his existence. Desel grew up hard and angry, and without knowing it, he carried a powerful connection to the dark side that he had never been trained to use. That connection manifested on its own. One night, while Desel slept, his latent dark side power reached out and ended his father's life. Desel had no idea what he had done. He just knew his father was gone. Later, after ending a Republic Navy soldier in self-defense during a confrontation, Desel fled Apatros and joined the Brotherhood of Darkness as a common foot soldier. He was not looking to become a Sith Lord. He was looking to survive. But his raw power and aggression caught the attention of a Sith Lord named Kopech, who recognized what Desel was and sent him to the Brotherhood's Sith Academy on Korriban. On Korriban, Desel took the name Bane. The Academy was not kind to him. The top student, a man named Sirak, targeted Bane and humiliated him in their first encounter. Bane lost badly. But with the help of a former Jedi turned Sith named Githany, who had her own reasons for wanting Sirak brought down, Bane rebuilt his connection to the dark side. He trained relentlessly. When the rematch with Sirak came, Bane won decisively and ended Sirak for good. But the Academy was not enough for Bane. He went deeper. He studied forbidden ancient Sith texts that the Brotherhood had locked away. He walked through the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, seeking the wisdom of the Sith Lords who had come before. And then he left Korriban entirely and traveled to Rakata Prime, the same world where the Kwa had once taught the Rakata and where the Infinite Empire had been born tens of thousands of years earlier. In the ruins of that world, Bane found the Sith holocron of Darth Revan. Revan's teachings changed everything for Bane. Through the holocron, Bane studied Revan's philosophy of the dark side, and he came to a conclusion that would reshape the entire future of the Sith. The Brotherhood of Darkness was wrong. Fundamentally, irreparably wrong. Khan's model of shared power and equality among Sith Lords did not strengthen the dark side. It weakened it. The dark side was meant to be concentrated, focused, sharpened into a blade. Spreading it across an army of equals turned that blade into dust. Bane reclaimed the long-abandoned title of Darth, a word that scholars believed was of Rakatan origin, meaning either emperor or immortal. He took the name Darth Bane, and he walked away from the Brotherhood of Darkness with a plan that would take 1,000 years to complete. During the 7th Battle of Ruusan, Bane put that plan into motion. He manipulated Lord Khan into deploying an ancient Sith weapon called a thought bomb. The thought bomb was designed to destroy every Force-sensitive being within its blast radius. Bane told Khan the Brotherhood would survive the detonation. That was a lie. The thought bomb went off inside the caves of Ruusan, and the blast wiped out the entire Brotherhood of Darkness. Every Sith Lord in the organization was gone in an instant. The Army of Light was caught in the blast as well. Jedi Lord Hoth and a significant portion of his forces were consumed alongside the Sith they had been fighting, and the spirits of everyone caught in the explosion were not released into the Force. They were trapped inside the thought bomb's energy sphere, locked in perpetual agony. When the dust settled, Darth Bane was the only Sith left alive in the galaxy. He had engineered the complete destruction of the Brotherhood of Darkness, sacrificed the Sith army, and eliminated every rival in a single stroke. The Jedi and the Republic surveyed the aftermath on Ruusan and came to a conclusion that Bane had been counting on. They believed the Sith were extinct, every last one of them gone forever. The war was over. The darkness had been defeated. They were wrong. The darkness had not ended. It had just gotten smarter. Bane needed an apprentice, and he found one in the wreckage of the battlefield. A young Force-sensitive girl named Rain had been brought to Ruusan by the Jedi during the final stages of the war. She was not a soldier. She was a child caught up in something far bigger than herself. During the fighting, a Jedi soldier accidentally struck down her friend, a native bouncer from Ruusan's surface. The grief and the rage hit Rain all at once. She tapped into the dark side instinctively and ended both soldiers before she even understood what she had done. Bane saw the whole thing. He recognized what that raw, unfiltered connection to the dark side meant. This girl had potential, and he took her as his apprentice, giving her the name Darth Zana. With Zana at his side, Bane established the framework that would define the Sith for the next 1,000 years. He called it the Rule of Two. The concept was simple. Only 2 Sith would exist at any given time, a master and an apprentice. The master would train the apprentice, pour everything they knew into them, push them to grow stronger and more dangerous with every passing year. And when the apprentice finally became powerful enough to defeat the master, they would do exactly that. They would take down the master, claim the title of Dark Lord, and find an apprentice of their own. Each generation would be stronger than the one that came before. The chain would never break. The rule of two solved every problem that had ever plagued the Sith. It concentrated the dark side's power into just two people instead of spreading it across an army. Bane believed the dark side's energy was finite, and the Brotherhood's model of shared power had diluted it to the point of uselessness. The rule of two also eliminated the infighting that had destroyed the Sith over and over again throughout their history. With only two Sith in existence, there was no room for political games or rival factions. And most importantly, the rule of two forced the Sith to operate in total secrecy. Two people hiding in the shadows were nearly impossible to find. The Jedi could not destroy what they could not detect. But the rule of two was only half of Bane's vision. The other half was the Sith grand plan. This was a conspiracy that no single Sith Lord would live long enough to complete. Bane understood that the Jedi Order and the Republic could not be brought down in a single generation. The institutions were too large, too entrenched, and too well protected. So instead of trying to conquer the galaxy with an army, the way every Sith Lord before him had attempted, Bane designed a plan that would unfold across centuries. Each master would advance it a little further and then pass the work to their apprentice. Over hundreds of years, the Sith would infiltrate the Republic's political and economic institutions. They would erode public trust in the Jedi. They would weaken Central Republic authority piece by piece. And when the moment was right, when the Republic was hollowed out from the inside and the Jedi were blind to the threat standing right in front of them, the Sith would strike once. And that single strike would end everything. Bane and Zannah set up a hidden base on the planet Ambria and began the work. Bane trained Zannah in the ways of the Sith, and she proved to be exactly the kind of apprentice the dark side demanded. Zannah had an extraordinary natural gift for Sith sorcery. Her abilities with dark side mental manipulation, illusions, and corruption were among the strongest the Sith had ever seen. She could break a person's mind without ever drawing a weapon. She became one of the most powerful Sith sorcerers in the Order's entire history. Bane, meanwhile, was dealing with his own transformation. He had been infected by creatures called obelisks, parasites from the moon Duxin that fed on dark side energy. The obelisks attached themselves to his body and formed a layer of armor that was nearly impossible to penetrate. They also amplified his dark side power significantly, but the cost was brutal. The obelisks caused him constant pain, and over time they began pushing him toward madness. Bane was getting stronger, but the price was his own stability. As the years passed, Bane started to worry. Zannah was powerful, but she was not challenging him. The entire point of the rule of two depended on the apprentice eventually rising up and taking the master's place. If Zannah lacked the ambition or the ruthlessness to make that move, then the system Bane had built would fail in its very first generation. He began to doubt her. He began to look for a backup plan. That backup plan was essence transfer, an ancient Sith technique that allowed a Force user to move their consciousness out of their own body and into someone else's. It was a twisted form of immortality. If Bane could master it, he would not need to wait for Zannah to challenge him. He could take her body for himself and continue the mission in a new form. Bane tracked down the holocron of Darth Andedu, an ancient Sith Lord who had mastered the technique, on a planet called Prakith. He studied it obsessively, preparing for the possibility that his apprentice would never step up on her own. But Bane had misjudged Zannah. She was not weak. She was not passive. She was patient. There is a difference. And when the time came, Zannah made her move. She challenged Bane to a duel on the world of Ambria, though some accounts place the confrontation on a planet called Done. The fight was ferocious. Bane brought raw physical power and lightsaber skill that had been sharpened across decades of combat. Zannah brought her sorcery, the devastating mental attacks and dark side illusions that could shatter an opponent's mind from the inside. The two of them tore into each other with everything they had. During the fight, Bane made his move. He attempted essence transfer. He tried to force his consciousness into Zannah's body and take it over. What happened next was never fully clear. Zannah claimed victory. She took the title of Dark Lord. But there were signs that something else had occurred beneath the surface. A brief moment where Zannah's hand clenched in a gesture that was distinctly Bane's, a movement that did not belong to her. Whether Bane's essence partially survived inside Zannah's body, or whether Zannah had absorbed some echo of her master during the transfer attempt, nobody could say for certain. But from Bane's perspective, the rule of two had been validated either way. His apprentice was either strong enough to defeat him cleanly, or cunning enough to absorb him and carry his legacy forward. The Sith had survived, and they had grown stronger. Zannah took a new apprentice. Her name was Darth Caedus, an Iktochi who had been known as the Huntress before her training. Caedus had been drawn to the dark side through her natural precognitive abilities, the power to see fragments of the future. She was not just loyal to the rule of two, she was fanatically devoted to it, more committed to Bane's system than Bane himself had been. That devotion was tested when Caedus trained her own apprentice, a Sith named Darth Millennial. Millennial had a different vision for the Sith. He believed the rule of two was too limiting and proposed building a larger organization. Caedus saw this as a betrayal of everything Bane had created and tried to end Millennial for it. He survived and fled to Dromund Kaas, where he founded a splinter group called the Prophets of the Dark Side. That cult would linger in the shadows for centuries, and eventually it would be absorbed and used by a Sith Lord named Darth Caedus in the distant future. The lineage continued. Master trained apprentice. Apprentice eventually rose up and took the master's place. Each generation accumulated more knowledge, more resources, and more influence than the one before. The Sith were no longer warriors charging into battle with armies at their backs. They were shadows. They were patient. They were threading themselves into the political and economic fabric of the Republic so quietly that nobody even knew they were there. The rule of two had turned the Sith from a blunt weapon into something surgical. And with every passing century, the grand plan moved a little closer to completion. For nearly 1,000 years, the Sith were invisible. Generation after generation of masters and apprentices carried the grand plan forward in careful, calculated steps. They accumulated wealth. They cultivated political allies in the Republic's corridors of power. They eroded the foundations of the galactic government so slowly that nobody noticed the cracks forming. And through all of it, the Jedi believed the Sith were gone, extinct, a problem from a past era that had been dealt with at Ruusan and would never return. Around 188 years before the Battle of Yavin, a dark Jedi named Kib Jeen actually tried to warn the Jedi Order. He told them the Sith had survived. He told them they were operating under a system called the Rule of Two. The Jedi dismissed him completely. They treated his warnings as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. The information was right there in front of them, and they chose not to see it. The Sith lineage during this era included names that most of the galaxy would never know. Darth Guile compared the Sith to malignant cells, spreading through a body undetected until it was too late to stop them. Darth Ramage was a scientist who experimented with time travel and exotic materials. Some of the Sith Lords in the chain resented the rule of two and wanted to break free from its restrictions. Others embraced it fully and poured themselves into the grand plan. But regardless of how any individual Sith felt about the system, the plan kept moving. Century after century, one step at a time. Around 167 years before the Battle of Yavin, the lineage reached a Bith Sith Lord named Darth Tenebrous. In public, Tenebrous was known as Rugus Gnome, a respected starship designer. Behind that public face, he was carrying the dark side forward into its next phase. But Tenebrous made a critical mistake. He broke the rule of two. He secretly trained a second apprentice named Darth Venomous, alongside his primary student, a moon named Darth Plagueis. In public, Plagueis went by the name Hago Damask, and he was one of the wealthiest and most connected individuals in the galaxy. In 67 years before the Battle of Yavin, Plagueis ended Tenebrous on the planet Baldemnik. The rule of two was fulfilled. The apprentice had risen, and the master had fallen. But Plagueis was not done cleaning house. He discovered Venomous, the secret second apprentice his master had been hiding, and defeated him in a duel. Rather than finishing Venomous off, Plagueis kept him alive. He had a use for the Bith. Venomous became a test subject for the research that would define Plagueis's entire existence. Darth Plagueis was obsessed with one thing above all else. He wanted to conquer the end of life itself. He believed the key was the manipulation of midichlorians, the microscopic organisms that existed inside every living being, and connected them to the Force. If Plagueis could learn to control midichlorians directly, he believed he could create new life from nothing and prevent the end of existing life entirely. His experiments pushed the boundaries of what anyone had ever attempted with the dark side. No Sith Lord before him had gone this far into the science of the Force itself. And Plagueis had a radical view of the rule of two. He believed Bane's system had served its purpose. The Sith had grown strong enough, patient enough, and powerful enough that the rule was no longer necessary. Plagueis did not intend to be overthrown by his apprentice. He intended to stand beside his apprentice forever. Two Sith Lords, immortal, ruling the galaxy together without the cycle of replacement that Bane had designed. In his mind, the rule of two was a ladder, and once you reached the top, you did not need the ladder anymore. Plagueis's public identity as Hago Damask gave him leverage that no previous Sith Lord had possessed. He was the head of Damask Holdings, one of the most powerful financial entities in the galaxy. He had relationships with the Trade Federation, the Intergalactic Banking Clan, and dozens of other corporate interests. He used those connections to manipulate galactic politics on a massive scale. He deliberately made the tensions between the core worlds and the outer rim worse, pulling the Republic apart from the inside while appearing to be nothing more than a wealthy businessman. Around 65 years before the Battle of Yavin, Plagueis visited the planet Naboo, and there he found the person who would change everything. A young nobleman named Palpatine. Palpatine came from an aristocratic family, but he was not the polished politician the galaxy would later come to know. He was angry. He carried a deep, burning hatred for his own family. And beneath that anger, Plagueis sensed a connection to the dark side that was staggering in its raw potential. Plagueis saw exactly what Palpatine could become. He fed the young man's rage, stoked it, shaped it, and used it to manipulate Palpatine into destroying his entire family. When it was done, Plagueis took the orphan as his apprentice and gave him his Sith name, Darth Caedus. Together, Plagueis and Sidious were the final product of 1,000 years of planning. Every Sith Lord who had come before them, every master who had trained an apprentice and then fallen to make way for the next generation, had been building toward this moment. Plagueis brought the financial leverage and the strategic vision. Sidious brought the political skill. He climbed the Republic's ladder with frightening speed, moving from ambassador to senator of Naboo, embedding himself in the very government the Sith had been working to destroy for a millennium. The two of them worked in tandem for decades. They engineered the Yinkori Uprising, which resulted in the loss of Jedi Council members and weakened the standing of Supreme Chancellor Valorum. They manipulated the Trade Federation, turning a commercial organization into a political tool. Every move was designed to push the Republic closer to the breaking point, while making the Jedi look less and less capable of keeping the peace. Plagueis proposed one of the most ambitious elements of the entire grand plan. He suggested commissioning a secret clone army on the ocean world of Kamino. The army would be financed through wealth the Sith had been accumulating for centuries, and the order would be placed through an unwitting intermediary, a Jedi Master named Sifo-Dyas, who genuinely believed the Republic needed a standing military force. Sifo-Dyas had no idea he was being used. The clone army he helped bring into existence would eventually become the Grand Army of the Republic, the very army that would serve alongside the Jedi in the Clone Wars, and the weapon that would be turned against them when the time came. Plagueis's midi-chlorian research continued to push into territory that no one had explored before. He and Sidious attempted to manipulate the midi-chlorians on a fundamental level, trying to tip the balance of the Force toward the dark side permanently. They were trying to bend the Force itself to their will, and there are strong suggestions in legends that the Force fought back, that this manipulation triggered a response from the Force, a countermeasure. The creation of a child born without a father on the desert planet of Tatooine, Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. If this is true, then the Sith's greatest ambition, their attempt to dominate the Force at its most basic level, accidentally created the very person who was destined to bring them down. They built their own ending without even knowing it. But that reckoning was still decades away. And in the short term, the grand plan was about to reach its political peak. Sidious had maneuvered himself into position for the highest office in the galaxy. He brought wine. He was patient. He waited until Plagueis had drifted into unconsciousness, and then Darth Sidious ended his master with Force lightning, while Plagueis lay helpless. The Sith Lord, who had dedicated his entire existence to conquering the end of life, was taken by his own apprentice in the most traditional way the Sith had ever known. Plagueis never saw it coming. He had believed the rule of two no longer applied to him. He was wrong. With Plagueis gone, Darth Sidious stood alone, the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years, the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, and the most dangerous being in the galaxy. The grand plan was entering its final stage, and nobody in the Republic or the Jedi Order had any idea what was about to happen. Now we are entering the part of this story that most fans will recognize. The events we are about to cover are the ones you have seen on screen, the ones that play out across the prequel trilogy. But what most people do not realize when they watch those films is just how deep the manipulation goes. Every crisis, every battle, every political move was engineered by one man operating on both sides of the board. And that man had been setting the pieces in place long before the cameras started rolling. Darth Sidious had been training an apprentice in secret for years before Plagueis was even gone. His name was Darth Maul. Maul was a Zabrak, taken from the Night Sisters of Dathomir when he was still a child. Sidious molded him from infancy into a weapon. The training was relentless. Intense physical conditioning, psychological pressure, and an environment designed to produce nothing but hatred and obedience. Maul was ferociously powerful and completely loyal to his master. But there is an important detail here. Maul was never considered a true Sith apprentice under the rule of two. Sidious and Plagueis both saw him as a tool, a disposable asset, an assassin who could be pointed at a target and unleashed. He was dangerous, but he was not the future of the Sith. He was a weapon with an expiration date. In 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, Sidious put the next stage of the grand plan into motion. He engineered the invasion of Naboo. Operating as Darth Sidious, he manipulated the Trade Federation and its leader, Viceroy Newt Gunray, into blockading the peaceful planet of Naboo and then launching a full-scale invasion. At the same time, operating as Senator Palpatine of Naboo, he used the crisis to make the sitting Supreme Chancellor, Finis Valorum, look weak and unable to protect the Republic's own member worlds. Queen Amidala of Naboo, desperate to save her people, called for a vote of no confidence in Valorum. She had no idea she was following a script that Palpatine had written from the very beginning. The vote passed. Valorum was removed, and Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The Sith now occupied the highest political office in the galaxy. 1,000 years of planning, stretching all the way back to Darth Bane standing alone on Ruusan, had led to this moment. During the Battle of Naboo, Darth Maul was deployed against the Jedi. He fought Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, in a lightsaber duel that remains one of the most iconic moments in the entire saga. Maul struck Qui-Gon down, but Obi-Wan, driven by grief and determination, fought back. He bisected Maul and sent him falling down a reactor shaft. In Legends continuity, Maul actually survived that fall through the sheer force of his dark side rage. He eventually returned as a cyborg, but his role in Sidious's plans was finished. He had served his purpose. The loss of Qui-Gon Jinn had consequences that reached far beyond that single duel. Qui-Gon was the Jedi most deeply attuned to the living force. He was intuitive in a way that the rest of the Order was not, and he was arguably the Jedi most likely to have eventually sensed Palpatine's true nature. With Qui-Gon gone, that possibility vanished. But there was a second consequence that was just as significant. Qui-Gon had discovered a young boy on Tatooine named Anakin Skywalker, a child he believed was the Chosen One. Qui-Gon had intended to train Anakin himself. Instead, that responsibility fell to the young and relatively inexperienced Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan was a good Jedi. He was dedicated and loyal and brave, but he was not Qui-Gon. And the difference between the Master Anakin was supposed to have and the Master he actually got would prove to be one of the most important factors in Anakin's eventual fall to the dark side. The Jedi Council now knew the Sith had returned. Maul's appearance on Naboo confirmed it. Yoda and Mace Windu recognized the threat immediately, but they were left with a question they could not answer. The Sith operated in pairs, a master and an apprentice. Which one had just fallen on Naboo? Was it the master or was it the apprentice? They did not know, and they would spend the next decade searching for the surviving Sith Lord, looking in every wrong direction while the answer sat in the Chancellor's office on Coruscant. Sidious needed a replacement. Maul had served as an assassin, but the next phase of the grand plan required something different. Sidious needed an apprentice who could operate in the political sphere, someone with credibility and connections who could move openly in the halls of power. He found exactly what he was looking for in Count Dooku. Dooku was a former Jedi Master, one of the most respected members of the Order during his time. He had also been one of the legendary Lost 20, the tiny handful of Jedi in the Order's history who had voluntarily walked away. Dooku's departure from the Jedi was not driven by anger or a hunger for power. He had genuinely lost faith. He watched the Republic drown in corruption. He watched the Jedi Order become complacent and rigid, more concerned with maintaining their own traditions than actually helping the galaxy. And he concluded that neither institution was capable of being saved. Sidious saw that disillusionment, and he exploited it perfectly. He did not appeal to Dooku's darker impulses. He appealed to his idealism. He told Dooku they could reshape the galaxy together, that they could tear down the broken system and build something better. Dooku accepted. He became Darth Tyrannus, and he stepped into his role as Sidious's new apprentice. Tyrannus's first major task was taking control of the clone army project that Plagueis had set in motion years earlier. Tyrannus arranged for the bounty hunter Jango Fett to serve as the genetic template for the clones, and he ensured that every single clone soldier was implanted with a behavioral chip containing a specific command. Order 66, a directive that, when activated, would compel the clones to turn on the Jedi and treat them as enemies of the Republic. The weapon that would one day destroy the Jedi Order was being built right under their noses, and the clones themselves had no idea what was buried inside their heads. Tyrannus also took on the public role that Sidious needed him to play. Using his aristocratic background and genuine charisma, Dooku became the face of the separatist movement. He traveled from system to system, rallying planets that were fed up with Republic corruption and the Senate's inability to govern effectively. Thousands of star systems answered his call and broke away from the Republic to form the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Corporate giants lined up behind the movement. The Trade Federation, the Commerce Guild, the Techno Union, and the Intergalactic Banking Clan all threw their resources into the separatist cause and provided a massive droid army to back it up. And this is where the full scope of Sidious's plan becomes clear. He was now controlling both sides of a galactic conflict that had not even started yet. As Chancellor Palpatine, he would lead the Republic and command its clone army. Through Darth Tyrannus, he commanded the Separatists and their droid forces. A staged war with one man directing both armies from opposite ends of the stage. The galaxy was about to tear itself apart, and the person everyone trusted to hold it together was the one pulling it apart. In 22 years before the Battle of Yavin, the war that Sidious had been building toward for decades finally arrived. The Clone Wars erupted at the Battle of Geonosis when the Jedi stumbled onto the Separatist droid army and the Republic deployed its newly discovered clone forces for the first time. For the next 3 years, the galaxy was consumed by a conflict on a scale that had not been seen since the new Sith Wars 1,000 years earlier. Entire systems were engulfed, trillions of lives were affected, and every single piece of it was being controlled by one person. Every aspect of the Clone Wars was engineered by Darth Sidious. He decided the pace. He decided the stakes. He decided the outcome of individual campaigns when it suited him. When the Republic needed a win to keep morale up, he made sure they got one. When the Separatists needed to push forward and keep the pressure on, he fed them intelligence. He could have ended the war at any point. He chose not to. Because the war was never about winning. The war was a tool, and Sidious was using it to accomplish several things at once. First, the war weakened the Republic from the inside out. It drained resources on a massive scale. Systems that had been stable for generations were suddenly stretched thin, trying to fund a conflict that never seemed to end. And with every passing month of fighting, the Senate handed more emergency powers to the Chancellor's office. Powers that were supposed to be temporary. Powers that Palpatine accepted with the appropriate amount of reluctance and concern in his voice, knowing full well that he would never give a single one of them back. The democratic institutions that had governed the Republic for thousands of years were being dismantled in real time, and the people doing the dismantling thought they were protecting themselves. Second, the war destroyed the Jedi Order from the inside. The Jedi were peacekeepers. They were monks and scholars and diplomats. They were trained to meditate, to listen to the Force, to resolve conflict through wisdom and patience. The Clone Wars turned them into battlefield generals. Jedi, who should have been sitting in temples studying the Force, were instead leading clone troopers through trench warfare on 100 different worlds. The violence and the stress and the constant moral compromises of commanding an army clouded their connection to the Force in ways they did not fully understand. The dark side was growing stronger around them every day, and they could feel it, but they could not figure out where it was coming from. They sensed something was wrong. They just could not identify what. Third, the war scattered the Jedi across the galaxy. Thousands of fronts meant thousands of Jedi deployed to remote systems, far from each other, far from the temple on Coruscant, and far from any support network. They were isolated, they were spread thin, and they had no idea that the isolation was deliberate. Sidious was positioning them exactly where he needed them to be for the strike that was coming. And fourth, the most important objective of all. The war gave Sidious the perfect environment to finish what he had started with Anakin Skywalker. Sidious had been working on Anakin since the boy arrived on Coruscant at 9 years old. Think about that for a moment. A Sith Lord had been grooming the Chosen One for over a decade by the time the Clone Wars started. Palpatine positioned himself as everything the Jedi Council was not. He was a father figure, a mentor, a confidant. He was the one authority figure in Anakin's life who never criticized him, never told him he was wrong, never set limits on what he could do or feel. Every time the Jedi Council pushed Anakin away with their rules and their suspicion, Palpatine was right there to pull him back in with understanding and praise. Anakin was uniquely vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. He had been taken from his mother on Tatooine as a child and brought into an order that told him attachment was forbidden. He was told he was the Chosen One, the most important person in the galaxy, but the Jedi Council treated him with caution and distrust instead of the respect he felt he deserved. He fell in love with Padme Amidala and married her in secret, living every day with the fear that the Jedi would find out and punish him for it. He was impulsive. He was proud. And underneath all of that confidence, he was terrified of losing the people he loved. Sidious saw every one of those pressure points, and he pressed on them systematically. He encouraged Anakin's frustration with the Jedi Council. He told Anakin his power was being wasted, that the Order was holding him back, that someone with his abilities should not be answering to people who did not understand him. He built up Anakin's sense that the rules applied to everyone else, but that he was different, that he was above the code, that he deserved to write his own path. The Clone Wars accelerated Anakin's slide. The constant combat fed his aggression. The stakes fed his fear. When his mother was taken by Tusken Raiders on Tatooine, Anakin arrived too late to save her. She passed in his arms, and the grief and the rage that followed drove Anakin to wipe out the entire Tusken village. Every single one of them. It was the most violent act Anakin had committed up to that point, and instead of facing consequences or seeking help, he buried it. He told Padme what he had done, but he never told the Jedi. Later, at the end of the war, Anakin fought Count Dooku aboard a separatist flagship. Anakin overpowered Dooku and disarmed him. Dooku was on his knees, defenseless. And Palpatine, sitting right there in the room, urged Anakin to finish it. Anakin struck down the unarmed Dooku. It was a direct violation of the Jedi Code, and it happened with the Chancellor of the Republic telling him it was the right thing to do. Dooku had been Sidious's apprentice. Sidious let his own student be destroyed without hesitation because Dooku's usefulness had run out. The apprentice had been replaced before he even knew it. Through all of this, Sidious was using the dark side to cloud the Jedi's ability to perceive the truth. He was sitting in the same city as the Jedi Temple. He walked the same streets. He stood in the same rooms as Yoda and Mace Windu, and they could not sense what he was. The dark side shroud that hung over the Republic was his creation. It was so thick and so complete that even the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy could only manage a vague feeling that something was off. They knew something was wrong. They could feel it in the Force, but the source was invisible to them. The man responsible was standing right next to them, smiling, shaking their hands, asking for their counsel, and they had no idea. Then came the final piece. Padme became pregnant, and Anakin began having visions. He saw Padme in pain. He saw her not surviving childbirth. The visions came to him the same way the visions of his mother had come years earlier. And the memory of what had happened with his mother, the fact that he had seen the warning signs and failed to act in time, consumed him. He was not going to let it happen again. He would do anything, pay any price, break any rule, cross any line to save her. Palpatine timed his final move with perfect precision. He revealed himself to Anakin as a Sith Lord. He told Anakin the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith who had learned to manipulate the midi-chlorians and prevent the people he cared about from passing on. He told Anakin that the dark side held the power to save Padme, that the Jedi could not help him, that the Jedi did not even want to help him because the Jedi Code forbade the kind of attachment that made saving her worth fighting for in the first place. Sidious offered Anakin the one thing no one else in the galaxy could offer, the power to keep the person he loved alive. And Anakin, after a decade of manipulation, after years of war, after watching his mother slip away and swearing it would never happen again, was standing on the edge of the darkest decision anyone in this story had ever made. Anakin did something the Sith did not expect. He went to the Jedi Council. He told Mace Windu that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. For one brief moment, the entire grand plan was in danger of collapsing. If the Jedi moved fast enough, if they handled the situation correctly, 1,000 years of Sith planning could have been undone in an afternoon. Windu assembled a team of 4 Jedi Masters to arrest the Chancellor. He brought Agen Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto with him. They marched into Palpatine's office on Coruscant, expecting to take him into custody. They were not prepared for what happened next. Sidious dropped his mask completely. He ignited a red lightsaber and tore through 3 of the 4 Jedi Masters in seconds. Kolar, Tiin, and Fisto fell so fast that the fight was barely a fight at all. Only Windu survived the opening moments. What followed was one of the most intense lightsaber duels in galactic history. Windu practiced a fighting style called Vapad, a form that was uniquely dangerous to dark side users because it channeled an opponent's own dark side energy and turned it back against them. Against Sidious, this style was devastatingly effective. Windu pushed Sidious back. He gained the advantage. He disarmed the Chancellor and cornered him against a shattered window overlooking the Coruscant skyline. For a single moment, Darth Sidious was beaten. Then Anakin walked in. Palpatine was pressed against the window, claiming to be too weak to fight. He begged Anakin for help. He told Anakin that he was the only one who could save Padme, that if Windu struck him down, the knowledge of how to prevent the loss of loved ones would be gone forever. Windu raised his weapon, declaring that Sidious was too dangerous to be left standing, and Anakin made the choice that would define the rest of galactic history. He ignited his lightsaber and severed Windu's sword hand. In the same instant, Sidious unleashed a wave of Force lightning that launched Windu through the broken window and out into the open air above Coruscant. Mace Windu was gone. Anakin fell to his knees. The weight of what he had just done hit him immediately. But there was no going back. Sidious stood over him and gave him a new name, Darth Vader. And then he gave Vader his first assignment. He was to lead the 501st Legion of clone troopers to the Jedi Temple and eliminate everyone inside. Vader marched on the Jedi Temple that night with thousands of clone soldiers behind him. The assault was swift and without mercy. Jedi Masters, Jedi Knights, Padawans, and younglings were all caught inside when the attack began. Vader led the operation personally. In the council room, a group of younglings had gathered, hiding and waiting for someone to tell them everything was going to be all right. A small boy looked up at Vader and asked what they were supposed to do. Vader ignited his lightsaber. The scene that followed is one of the darkest moments in the entire Star Wars saga. At the same time, Sidious activated the weapon that had been built into the clone army from the very beginning. He issued Order 66. The command traveled across the galaxy to every clone unit on every battlefield. The behavioral chips that Darth Tyrannus had ensured were implanted in every clone during the manufacturing process on Kamino activated simultaneously. And in an instant, the soldiers who had fought alongside the Jedi for 3 years turned on their commanders. There was no hesitation. There was no warning. Across thousands of worlds, clone troopers received the order and executed it without a shred of resistance. On Magito, Ki-Adi-Mundi was struck down by his own troops as he led a charge. On Felucia, Aayla Secura was hit from behind by the clone soldiers she had served beside for years. On Utapau, Commander Cody, who had just handed Obi-Wan Kenobi his lightsaber moments earlier, ordered his forces to fire on the Jedi General. Obi-Wan survived the attack, but only barely. On Kashyyyk, Yoda sensed the betrayal through the Force a fraction of a second before his own clones made their move. He struck them down and escaped into the Wookiee wilderness. Across the galaxy, thousands of Jedi were lost in minutes. Out of approximately 10,000 Jedi who had been serving the Republic, only a handful survived. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and a scattered few dozen others who went into deep hiding, changing their names, severing their connection to the Force, and vanishing into the forgotten corners of the galaxy. The Jedi Order, which had stood as the guardians of the Republic for over 25,000 years, was wiped from existence in a single night. Palpatine convened a special session of the Galactic Senate. Standing before the assembled representatives of thousands of worlds, he delivered the final lie. He told them the Jedi had attempted a coup against the Republic. He declared the entire Order to be traitors and enemies of the state. And then, with the full backing of a Senate that had already handed him every power he had ever asked for, Palpatine proclaimed the birth of a new galactic empire. He named himself Emperor, and the Senate applauded. They stood and they cheered for the man who had just dismantled their democracy in front of them. Padme Amidala, watching from her seat, understood exactly what had just happened. She saw it with a clarity that no one else in the chamber seemed to share. Freedom had not been taken from the galaxy by force. It had been surrendered willingly, with applause. Obi-Wan and Yoda regrouped. They knew they had to act. Yoda went to Coruscant to confront Sidious directly in the Senate chamber. The duel between the two of them was ferocious, but Yoda could not overcome the Emperor. He was forced to retreat. The Jedi Grand Master, the wisest and most powerful Jedi alive, had to accept that the Sith had won. Obi-Wan tracked Vader to the volcanic planet of Mustafar, where Vader had gone to eliminate the separatist leaders on Sidious's orders. The confrontation between master and former student was the most emotionally charged duel in the entire saga. Two men who had fought side by side for over a decade, who had been as close as brothers, now trying to end each other on the banks of a lava river. Obi-Wan gained the high ground. Vader, consumed by arrogance and rage, attacked anyway. Obi-Wan severed Vader's legs and his remaining organic arm. Vader collapsed onto the volcanic shore, his body catching fire from the heat of the lava flowing beside him. Obi-Wan could not bring himself to finish it. He walked away, leaving the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker burning on the edge of a river of molten rock. Sidious arrived on Mustafar and retrieved what was left of his apprentice. Vader was rebuilt. His shattered body was sealed inside a black life support suit that would keep him alive but would also serve as a constant prison. The suit was deliberately designed to cause discomfort. The suit became his cage, and the man who had once been the most promising Jedi of his generation was now locked inside it. Padme Amidala did not survive. She held on long enough to give birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Luke and Leia. The children were separated immediately and hidden from the Empire. Obi-Wan took the infant Luke to Tatooine and placed him in the care of Owen and Beru Lars. Leia was taken to Alderaan and adopted by Senator Bail Organa and his wife. Yoda disappeared into exile on the swamp world of Dagobah. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Sith ruled the galaxy openly. The Republic was gone. The Jedi were gone. The grand plan that Darth Bane had set in motion on the ashes of Ruusan had been fulfilled in its entirety. Vader became the enforcer of the Galactic Empire. He was the armored fist that kept the galaxy in line. He hunted down surviving Jedi. He crushed rebellions before they could gain momentum. He maintained order through fear in a way that no military force alone could accomplish. And he led a group called the Inquisitorius. These were Jedi who had survived Order 66 but had been captured, broken through pain and psychological pressure, and corrupted by the dark side. Sidious turned them into hunters. Under Vader's command, the Inquisitors tracked Jedi survivors across the galaxy and seized Force-sensitive children wherever they were found. The dark side was not just ruling the galaxy, it was actively hunting down anyone who might one day challenge it. Vader, meanwhile, was running his own plans in the shadows. He secretly took an apprentice named Galen Marek, codenamed Starkiller. Marek was the Force-sensitive son of a Jedi that Vader had struck down years earlier. Vader had taken the child and raised him as a weapon, training him in the dark side with one goal in mind. He wanted to use Marek to help him overthrow Sidious. This was a direct violation of the rule of two. Bane's system demanded that the apprentice challenge the master directly. But Vader's physical and psychological damage had destroyed his confidence. He did not believe he could defeat the Emperor on his own. He needed help. Starkiller was ultimately used and thrown away by both Sith Lords. Sidious discovered the secret apprentice and manipulated the situation to his advantage. But Marek's final act, his sacrifice in defense of the people he had come to care about, helped inspire the formation of the Rebel Alliance. The very resistance movement that would eventually bring down the Empire was sparked in part by a boy who had been raised in darkness and chose to step into the light at the very end. The Empire's reign lasted 23 years. In the grand scope of this story, that is nothing. The Rakata ruled for 5,000 years. Marka Ragnos held the Sith Empire together for over a century. 23 years is barely a footnote compared to those timelines, but the impact of those 23 years was devastating. The dark side was woven into every level of the Imperial machine. Sidious used the Force to project an atmosphere of fear and submission across billions of lives. The galaxy did not just obey the Empire. It feared the Empire on a level that went beyond military threat. The dark side was pressing down on everyone, everywhere, all the time. The turning point came from the most unlikely source, Luke Skywalker, the son that Vader never knew he had. Luke grew up as a farm boy on a desert world, with no idea that his father was the most feared man in the galaxy. When Luke emerged as a Force-sensitive hero of the Rebel Alliance and destroyed the first Death Star, Sidious saw an opportunity. Vader was damaged goods. Luke was young, powerful, and potentially far more useful. Sidious began orchestrating events to bring Luke before him, planning to turn the son and use him to replace the father. At the Battle of Endor, 4 years after the Battle of Yavin, Sidious sprang his trap. He deliberately leaked the location of the second Death Star, still under construction above the forest moon of Endor, to the Rebel Alliance. He lured the Rebel fleet into an ambush. He revealed that the Death Star was already fully operational, and he brought Luke Skywalker before him on the station, face to face with both the Emperor and his father. Sidious pushed Luke to give in to his anger. He wanted Luke to strike Vader down and take his place as the Emperor's new apprentice. Luke and Vader fought. The duel was not just physical. It was a battle between a son trying to save his father and a father too consumed by darkness to see a way out. And then Vader found the one lever that could break Luke's control. He told Luke that if he would not turn, perhaps his sister would. The mention of Leia, the threat of the dark side reaching someone Luke loved, pushed him over the edge. Luke tapped into the dark side and attacked Vader with everything he had. He overwhelmed his father and severed Vader's mechanical hand with a single strike. And then Luke stopped. He stood over his beaten father and looked down at the sparking stump where Vader's hand had been. Then he looked at his own hand, his own mechanical hand, the one he had received after Vader had taken the original on Cloud City. The mirror between them was perfect, father and son, both marked by the same cycle of violence and loss. Luke threw his lightsaber away. He told the Emperor that he had failed, that he was a Jedi, the same as his father had been before him. Sidious was furious. If Luke would not turn, then he would be destroyed. The Emperor unleashed a sustained assault of Force lightning on Luke, pouring dark side energy into the young Jedi with the intent of ending him slowly. Luke collapsed under the attack. He could not defend himself. He called out for his father. Vader stood between them. He watched his master pour lightning into his son. He watched Luke writhing on the floor, reaching out, calling for help. And somewhere inside the black suit, underneath the machinery and the pain and 23 years of darkness, Anakin Skywalker woke up. He grabbed the Emperor. He lifted Sidious off his feet and carried him to the edge of the Death Star's reactor shaft. The Force lightning tore into Vader's suit, shorting out the life support systems that kept him alive. But Anakin did not stop. He hurled Sidious down the shaft. The most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years fell screaming into the reactor core. The dark side's grip on the galaxy was broken by the one thing it had never been able to account for: a father's love for his son. Anakin's suit was failing. The lightning had done too much damage. He asked Luke to take the mask off. He wanted to see his son with his own eyes, not through the helmet's lenses. Luke removed the mask, and for the first and only time, father and son looked at each other as themselves. Anakin told Luke that he had been right, that there had still been good in him. And then Anakin Skywalker passed on in his son's arms. The Chosen One had fulfilled the prophecy. He brought balance to the Force by destroying the Sith from within. His body was burned on a funeral pyre on Endor. And later, when Luke looked into the Force, he saw 3 spirits standing together: Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker, redeemed, or so the galaxy believed. Darth Sidious had planned for everything, including his own end. When Anakin Skywalker hurled him down the reactor shaft of the second Death Star, the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years did not vanish into the Force. He had spent decades preparing for this exact scenario. The moment his body was destroyed, Sidious used essence transfer to project his consciousness across the galaxy to Biss. His spirit latched onto one of his Emperor's hands, a man named Jeng Droga. The possession drove Droga insane. But Sidious did not need Droga to last. He needed him to hold on just long enough for the spirit to find its real destination: a fresh clone body. Sidious had maintained dozens of them in secret facilities on Biss, grown specifically for this purpose. The Emperor stepped into a new body and began rebuilding. For 6 years, nobody knew. The Galactic Empire, stripped of Sidious's unifying will, fractured into warring factions led by competing warlords who each believed they were the rightful successor. The New Republic established itself as the galaxy's new government. Luke Skywalker began building a new Jedi Order, training a fresh generation of Force users on Yavin 4. The galaxy was healing. And hidden in the deep core, Sidious was watching all of it, assembling a new war machine in total secrecy. In 10 years after the Battle of Yavin, Sidious made his move. He revealed himself and unleashed the Dark Empire. His rebuilt Sith regime struck from Biss with weapons that made the original Death Star look restrained. The Galaxy Gun could destroy entire planets from the other side of the galaxy without ever entering the target system. World Devastators were massive mobile factories that consumed everything in their path, breaking down cities, ships, and infrastructure and converting the raw material into new weapons of war. The Dark Empire attacked the New Republic from the deep core, and the galaxy found itself staring at the return of the one person everyone believed was gone for good. And then Sidious did something that shook the foundations of the entire Star Wars story. He turned Luke Skywalker to the dark side. Luke went to Biss believing he could infiltrate the Sith and destroy them from the inside. It was the same plan Ulic Qel-Droma had tried 4,000 years earlier when he infiltrated the Krath, and it ended the same way. Luke knelt before the reborn Emperor and became his apprentice. What pulled Luke in was not a promise of raw power or a vision of domination. It was despair. He was facing an enemy who could cheat the end of life itself. Every time the galaxy thought Sidious was finished, he came back. Luke looked at that and saw a fight that could never be won. The futility broke him. But the Skywalker family was not finished. Leia Organa Solo, Luke's twin sister, reached him. Using her own connection to the Force and the bond between them that no amount of dark side corruption could sever, Leia pulled Luke back. She did what the Jedi Council never could. She reminded her brother who he was. And together, the Skywalker twins confronted Sidious. The Emperor was running out of options. His clone bodies were deteriorating at an accelerating rate. The dark side energy required to sustain his spirit was burning through each body faster than a new one could be grown. The clones were failing, and in a final act of desperation, Sidious attempted to transfer his essence into the infant Anakin Solo, the newborn son of Han and Leia. He was going to take the body of a child to keep himself alive. Han Solo destroyed Sidious's last remaining clone body before the transfer could complete. But the Emperor's disembodied spirit was still there, still reaching for the infant, still trying to claw its way into a new host. And that is when a Jedi Knight named Empatogaios Brand stepped forward. Brand was a survivor of Order 66. He had lived through the Purge, spent decades in hiding, and eventually joined Luke's new Jedi Order. In this moment, he gave everything he had left. Brand used light side shielding techniques to bind Sidious's spirit and contain it. The effort cost Brand his life. He passed on, and as he went, he dragged Sidious's spirit down with him into the depths of the Force, permanently. The Emperor who had cheated the end of life across multiple bodies, who had returned from the reactor shaft, who had rebuilt an empire from the shadows, was finally gone, for good. In 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, Palpatine was truly finished. The Dark Empire collapsed without him, and the galaxy had learned a lesson that nobody wanted to hear. The end of life was not enough to stop the dark side. Even destroying the most powerful Sith Lord in history had not been permanent the first time. It took a second round, and the sacrifice of a Jedi who was willing to go with him into the void to make it stick. Then came the worst war the galaxy had faced since the Clone Wars. In 25 years after the Battle of Yavin, an invasion force arrived from outside the galaxy entirely. The Yuuzhan Vong were an alien species that existed completely outside the Force. They could not be sensed through the Force. They could not be manipulated by it. Their biotechnology was immune to telekinesis. Everything the Jedi had ever relied on was useless against them. The Yuuzhan Vong War lasted 4 years and nearly ended civilization as the galaxy knew it. The Vong conquered Coruscant itself. Trillions of lives were lost. The New Republic was pushed to the edge of total collapse. The Jedi were tested in ways that no previous generation had ever faced. During the war, Jacen Solo was captured by the Yuuzhan Vong. Jacen was the son of Han Solo, and Leia Organa, the nephew of Luke Skywalker, the grandson of Darth Vader. He endured a full year of captivity, subjected to a device called the Embrace of Pain that inflicted constant physical agony. A former Jedi named Verdure, who had been living among the Vong for decades, found Jacen during his imprisonment and taught him a philosophy that deliberately blurred the line between the light side and the dark side. She challenged everything the Jedi Order had taught him about the Force. Jacen emerged from that experience fundamentally changed. He came out of the war possessing abilities that no other Jedi had ever demonstrated, including flow walking, the ability to project his consciousness through time, and the power to teleport objects across distances. After the Yuuzhan Vong War ended, Jacen's transformation continued. A woman named Lumiya found him. Lumiya was the self-proclaimed Dark Lady of the Sith, a former Emperor's hand who had trained under both Darth Vader and Darth Caedus during the days of the Empire. She had survived the fall of both her masters and had been waiting in the shadows for decades. Lumiya began working on Jacen the same way Sidious had once worked on Anakin. She convinced him that the dark side was the only path to lasting peace, that the galaxy's endless cycle of war could only be broken by someone willing to seize control and hold it through force. Jacen fell. He took the Sith name Darth Caedus and ignited the Second Galactic Civil War in the years 40 to 41 after the Battle of Yavin. Caedus seized control of the Galactic Alliance and ruled as a tyrant. He struck down Mara Jade Skywalker, Luke's wife, in one of the most devastating moments in the entire Legends timeline. He subjected his own former apprentice, Ben Skywalker, Luke's son, to treatment that no Jedi should ever inflict on another. He became everything his grandfather had been. Darth Vader without the suit. But there was a critical difference. Vader had been manipulated by the most cunning Sith Lord in history from the age of 9. Caedus had walked into the darkness with his eyes open. Darth Caedus was brought down by his own twin sister. Jaina Solo faced him in a lightsaber duel aboard his Star Destroyer. The fight ended with Caedus falling to his sister's blade. But in his final moments, Caedus did not reach for the dark side. He used the Force to send a warning to his secret partner, Tenel Ka, about a threat to their daughter, Alana. His last act was not one of power or vengeance. It was an act of love for his child. Even at the very end, after everything he had done, there was still something in him that the dark side had not completely taken. The Skywalker bloodline carried the same flaw through every generation. The capacity for the deepest darkness and the refusal to let that darkness have the final word. Darth Caedus was gone, but the dark side did not go with him. It never does. The most terrifying threat to emerge in the aftermath was not a Sith Lord. It was something older and worse. An ancient entity named Abeloth, imprisoned in the heart of the Maw, a cluster of black holes in the outer rim. Abeloth had been locked away by the ones of Mortis, the Father, the Son, and the Daughter, Force beings who embodied balance, the dark side, and the light side of the Force. She had been trapped there for an almost incomprehensible amount of time, and when the galaxy's Force users grew powerful enough to weaken the walls of her prison, she got out. Abeloth could possess multiple bodies at the same time. She could drive Force users insane. She could manipulate the Force on a scale that made Sidious look restrained. She was the dark side in its most raw and ancient form, not a philosophy, not an organization, a cosmic force with a will of its own. It took Luke Skywalker at the absolute peak of his power, working alongside an uneasy alliance with the lost tribe of Sith to bring Abeloth down. And even then, they could not finish her permanently. Abeloth represented something the galaxy had never been able to solve. The dark side as something bigger than any individual who wielded it. While the galaxy dealt with Abeloth, a completely different kind of Sith threat had been growing in the shadows for over a century. Its founder was a man named Asharad Het. He was the son of Jedi Knight Sharad Het and had been raised among the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine. Het became a Jedi Knight himself, fought in the Clone Wars, and even served alongside Anakin Skywalker on the battlefield. He survived Order 66. After the Purge, Het returned to Tatooine and became a Tusken warlord. When his raids started threatening the local moisture farms, he was confronted by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was still hiding on the planet as Luke's secret guardian. Kenobi defeated Het, severed his arm, and forced him into exile. Humiliated and lost, Het drifted. He became a bounty hunter, and that path eventually led him to Korriban, where he found Sith holocrons and began absorbing their teachings. But Het's true fall came during the Yuuzhan Vong War. He was captured by Vergere and subjected to the embrace of pain, the same device that had broken Jacen Solo. The experience destroyed whatever was left of his Jedi identity. He emerged carrying Yuuzhan Vong bio-implants that were slowly consuming his body from the inside. Het retreated to Korriban and was reborn as Darth Krayt. Krayt looked at the entire history of the Sith and came to a conclusion that would have made Darth Bane furious. He rejected the rule of two completely. Instead of two Sith hiding in the shadows, Krayt built an entire order. Hundreds of Sith lords, all united under the authority of one Dark Lord, himself. He called it the Rule of One. When Krayt sought guidance from the holocrons of the ancient Sith, they turned on him. Bane's gatekeeper warned that the Rule of One would be the end of all Sith. Darth Nihilus refused to offer anything. Darth Andedu called him a heretic. Krayt ignored every single one of them. He spent over a century building the one Sith in secret, using dark side rituals to extend his life far beyond its natural limit. He manipulated galactic events from the shadows, using the Second Galactic Civil War and Darth Caedus as distractions to keep attention away from what he was building on Korriban. In 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, Krayt made his move. He sabotaged a Jedi-backed terraforming initiative called the Ossus Project that used Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology to restore damaged worlds. Krayt poisoned the project and framed the Jedi for it. The resulting outrage triggered a war between the Galactic Alliance and the Fel Empire, the reformed Imperial remnant led by Emperor Rowan Fel. Krayt waited until both sides had weakened each other. Then he struck. He marched into Fel's throne room with his Sith army and took the man sitting on the throne down. The real Fel had escaped using a decoy, but it did not matter. The Moff Council, with no other options, swore loyalty to the new Sith Emperor. For the first time in 90 years, a Sith Lord held the galactic seat of power. And this time, he had an army of Sith to enforce his rule. Krayt launched a coordinated strike against the Jedi at Ossus that nearly wiped out the Order entirely. He imposed harsh control across the galaxy, but his empire had the same fatal flaw that had brought down Sith empires for tens of thousands of years. It depended entirely on one person. Krayt was secretly failing. The Vong implants were consuming him, and only his command of the dark side kept him standing. He was betrayed by his closest advisor, Darth Wirelock III, who tried to seize control. Krayt fought his way back through sheer willpower, but the walls were closing in. The deposed Emperor fell. The remnants of the Galactic Alliance and the surviving Jedi were all converging on him. The person who ended it was the last person anyone expected. Cade Skywalker, a direct descendant of Luke Skywalker, who wanted nothing to do with the Jedi, the Force, or his family's legacy. Cade had rejected everything. He had walked away from his training, become a bounty hunter, and lived in self-imposed exile from the Force. But he carried something inside him that he could not outrun. A unique ability to heal others and even bring the recently fallen back by channeling the dark side. That power tempted him toward the same fate that had claimed his ancestors. And no matter how far he ran, the fight kept pulling him back in. Cade Skywalker brought Darth Krayt down in a final confrontation. The one Sith scattered. They tried to regroup in the shadows, but they were betrayed from within by a Sith named Darth Red. Red believed in Bane's original rule of two and saw Krayt's order as a corruption of everything the Sith were supposed to be. He orchestrated a trap that wiped out the remaining one Sith entirely. Krayt's century-long project was erased. By 138 years after the Battle of Yavin, the Sith appeared to be extinct once more. A new Galactic Federation triumvirate formed, bringing the Jedi, the Fel Empire, and the Galactic Alliance together in a coalition built on cooperation instead of domination. For the first time in a very long time, the galaxy had reason to hope.